This is Atomic Shinobi and today I'm going to narrate first part of what if Naruto was neglected by his family because of Kyuubi's soul. If you enjoy this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. No wasting no more time. Let's start the story.
Unaware and unprepared, the village was attacked by the Kyuubi, also known as the Nine-Tailed Fox, on the night of October 10th. The village had suffered a great deal, and many people were wondering when and where their good leader would come to their aid and save everyone. Unbeknownst to everyone, the Yondaime was actually assisting his wife with giving birth. He had come after their daughter, and to the surprise of the Kyuubi's release and Kushina's weakness, he remained by her side until the end. He would have left long ago, but he still needed to assist in bringing out his son. Kushina was too far gone. The only thing keeping her alive until help arrived was her bloodline. She would perish from the strain if he sealed the Kyuubi against her. The only thing he learned in the weeks prior was that a Biju could not be killed. Millions of attempts had been made, but none had been successful. It was possible to seal a Biju, and ironically, he was an expert at it. However, the higher up the hierarchy one went, the more difficult it became, and the Kyuubi was at the top. Then he discovered something in the prohibited area. Through a ritual, the Shinigami himself was called forth, and after tearing the soul from your adversary, he marked you and ate your soul as well as the enemy's. A desperate attempt. But if the user died with his victim, what good was it to mark him? Unless a sealing took place. Minato returned to his research with renewed vigor and began to make changes after verifying that it was, in fact, a sealing ceremony. Since it was a sealing, the precise location of the target's sealing should be controllable. Since the Kyuubi was far too powerful to be imprisoned in a teapot like the Ichibi, he knew that if he sealed it into something, it wouldn't take a week before the beast was once again free. No animal had the mentality or willpower to keep the Kyuubi at bay, so if one was used, it would take over before you could say, "Oh shit." A human was the only possible explanation. Though he wasn't sure if the Kyuubi had a trick that would let it get out of the Shinigami's grasp, his ideal scenario would be to seal it in himself and then drag them both to hell. Since an adult's or even a child's chakra network was already too established to withstand the unexpected surge of chakra, any other adult was also absent. The sole item capable of adapting was a baby. Maybe split it up. Is it feasible? It works on the same principle. The converter and filter need to be changed. To sacrifice my own two children for this would be a great blow to the Kyuubi, if I could. Not until I'm certain. Besides, if I told Kushina this now, she would kill me. Minato was now at an all-time low. He wouldn't have thought twice about giving up his life, but to involve innocent people in this, particularly because he was aware that only two babies, his own, would be born in time for the sealing. Just a few minutes ago, Kushina's water broke. He was expecting a daughter and a son. He would also need to seal the Kyuubi inside of them. Minato was aware that he couldn't ask someone to give up their child if he wasn't willing to give up his own, even if another mother gave birth early. Kushina smiled at both of her infants as she held them in her arms. Ironically, Tsunami's blonde hair was a perfect match for Naruto's red hair, which made him look exactly like his father. Since she could sense the Kyuubi's chakra and knew that the beast was probably on its way to the gates, she couldn't really blame them for crying. "Shush, it's okay. Don't worry, Daddy will find a way to save the day. That's what your daddy does best. Tsunami, Naruto, it'll be fine." Speaking of the devil, he appeared with a funeral. Appropriate expression, it didn't look good. Knowing that this would be his final encounter with his wife, Minato gazed at her. He made himself smile. "Hello Kushina, how are you doing? Are the children all right?" Kushina smiled weakly at him. "Tsunami and Naruto are just fine, and according to Bawako, I'm out of the woods. What about you? Did you find something?" Minato gave a nod. "A few weeks ago I researched, and found out that while it's impossible to destroy the Kyuubi, I can seal it away. I know the jutsu and I've already designed the array." Kushina grinned in relief. "That's wonderful darling, why do you look so down?" Minato hoped he could remain silent, but he knew that would not only betray Kushina, but it would also be ineffective. However, how do you inform your spouse that you will die and instill a monster in her offspring? Well, Bawako gave him a look. There's a catch, isn't there? As a medic, reading people was second nature to her, and she had always been perceptive. Yes, there are two. Kushina gave him a look. What are they? Minato swallowed. For the sealing to work, I need to sacrifice my life. Kushina's gaze expanded. She said in a whisper, "No, tell me it's not true." Minato gave her a quick look. "I can't. To seal the Kyuubi, I need to summon the Shinigami." Kushina cried. "It's not fair. After all we've been through, after all we've lost, after the war, now that we finally came this far, it just ends like this. Now that we finally have children, They will never know their father. It's just not fair. Bawako gave him a sympathetic but piercing look. Was that the other catch? Minato was unable to look Kushina or her in the eyes. At last, he whispered, "No." His voice sounded as though he had suppressed a sob. In reality, Kushina was not listening. What could be worse than this news? Bawako inquired. What is? Minato's voice shook as he gazed at the ground. He paused, fighting back tears, and said, "The only thing that can hold, that could hope to keep the Kyuubi at bay, is an infant." Kushina gazed at him, her eyes wide. Next, she drew her kids nearer to her chest. "No," she said, her voice growing louder and louder in panic. "No, you can't. Not them. No, I won't let you. Not our children. No, I won't let them the same life as me." Now with tears streaming down his face, Minato slammed his fist against the wall. He exclaimed, "Do you think I want to do this?" and then inhaled deeply. "Kushina, I've looked through every possible source. I've searched everywhere. If I seal the fox in an object, the object will break. If I seal it in an animal, the fox will take over. If I try to take it down with me, it may escape me, as it and I would have no time for our souls to connect, so I'd have no hold, and nobody with said chakra. Coils could possibly survive the sealing. I arranged it so the chakra and soul dived. There is nobody else." Kushina. He became quieter and began to cry. "There is nobody else." With hesitation, Bawako gave him a back pat. This demonstrated to her once more that, like her husband, the title of Hokage was more of a burden and a curse than anything else. Here was a man, a devoted husband and new father, who had to damn his own child in order to house a demon, in addition to giving up his life in his prime. That's all. The job was awful. Minato pleaded for a few minutes before leaving the room with the twins and heartbroken. Even though he knew he had to do it, it didn't make him feel any better. It made him feel worse, if anything. Standing atop Gamabunta's head, Minato gazed at the fox that had ruined his and his family's joy. He let out a sigh. "You ready, Gamabunta?" The big toad gave a humorless snort. "Nobody is ever ready to face that one, but I'll buy you as much time as I can." "Thanks. Tell Jiraiya to get you a large bottle of sake, my treat," Minato replied. The toad gave a nod. "Well then, let's go." The toad then used his sword to block a tail as he charged at what might be the most dangerous animal on the planet. Hop around, slash it when you see an opening, don't get hit, was the foundation of his entire strategy. It was working so far. Sarutobi Hiruzen, the third Hokage, showed up beside him as he was completing the seal on his son. "Minato, what are you doing?" He strained to design the seals as quickly as possible, saying, "I'm going to seal it. I found out a technique that can summon the Shinigami, and by sacrificing my life I will seal it into my twins." "What? Don't do this, Minato. You can't abandon them so quickly as a father. How about Kushina?" "She knows already. There's nothing else I can do." He had completed the seal, only a few seconds away. He hurried, "Let me do it," out loud. "What? I'm old, Minato. I won't be alive for much longer. Let me do this, for all the sacrifices, for the village and for your family." Minato gazed at him in disbelief. "What about Bawako? She will understand. It will be regretful that we will not be together in the afterlife, but she knows that I love the village as much as I love her. She'll understand." After giving it some thought, Minato nodded his head slowly and said, "All right, here are the signs." Gamabunta took a blow that would leave a scar over his eye but not enough to dispel him, and Sarutobi flashed through the final hand signals. "Hurry! I can't keep it occupied for long," the toad called. Sarutobi finished a few seconds later, with the Shinigami floating behind him, and he calmly said the words that would kill him. "Shiki Fuin." The seal Minato had inscribed glowed, then faded away. It was over. He felt as though his chest was covered in ice as the Shinigami's arm sprang out of his stomach, grabbing the Kyuubi, struggling desperately while Gamabunta prevented it from escaping before vanishing with a poof and somehow turning it into red mist and a red liquid that it placed in Tsunami and Naruto's stomach respectively. When it was all over, the Sandaime Hokage departed from this world. When he returned to his home, he discovered the medic Nin healing his wife and telling him she would survive. He explained what had happened to his wife and Bawako, who excused herself, probably to grieve for her husband, even though she was afraid to leave her son alone with only his soul. Tsunami had 3 whiskers on her face, probably from the Kyuubi's chakra, while Naruto's hair had unexpectedly grown a bit and his ears looked like foxes. Shortly after, the Yondaime Hokage appeared on the balcony of the Hokage Tower, addressing everyone, both civilians and shinobi. Kushina was in a wheelchair, holding both of her children. "We have suffered a great deal tonight." He looked down at his people, all of them with nearly broken spirits. He had to do something to help them flourish again. The Kyuubi's attack might have hurt us, it might tell others that we have become weak and ripe for the taken, he said, adding, but we all know that is not true. Our forces have diminished with such an attack and those that we have sworn to protect have lost many members. Are we not the great village of Konoha? As he spoke, some people could hear the light returning to their eyes. We have triumphed over numerous opponents and always come out on top. The strongest shinobi and the kindest citizens of the elemental nations are our offspring. We have dominated the economy, the military, culture, and much more, and we will return stronger than ever. Since they had already placed their fallen comrades on a pedestal and their sacrifice was not in vain, many were proud of this and wanted to surpass it in order to make them proud of everything they had protected. We will show the other villages that we are not weak, that they will not push us around, and that with this we will come back stronger. Earlier today, one of the many sacrifices of this attack, the Sandaime Hokage, Sarutobi Hiruzen, fell in the line of battle, but he didn't fall for the Kyuubi's attack, no, he fell to seal the Kyuubi. The crowd had once again fallen into an eerie silence, with some people looking confused and others sad at the news. Many were smiling, supporting him, and praising his strong sense of duty. Because it is a massive chakra, the Kyuubi can be killed but will not perish. It would reappear later, so instead of killing it, I used his assistance and sacrifice to create a seal, which I am quite skilled at, and we sealed the Kyuubi using his skills. The people were relieved that the monster was no longer there, and they had complete faith in their Hokage to keep it at bay. Were they sealed? Isn't this how we should destroy it? The crowd stared at the Hokage in fear as he shook his head and said, no, if it was done that way it may come back and in a fit of rage attack us again. That is why, I have sealed it into my newborn twins. The Hokage had children? The Hokage sacrificed his own twins? Was the question that ran through their minds and voices as many gasped at this. I couldn't dare ask any other person to do so with their children when I couldn't with mine, they said. I have thus sealed the Kyuubi himself into my son and its chakra into my firstborn daughter with the Sandaime's assistance. In this manner, the Kyuubi pose no threat to any of us, and my daughter's strength becomes a valuable ally. She will prove to those other villages that the will of fire continues when she is properly trained. Many people remained silent as they took in the news that the Yondaime's daughter would be someone to defend her village from any danger. A few people in the crowd began to clap, which set off a chain reaction in which everyone, men, women, and children, started cheering and chanting, Yondaime! Yondaime! When the crowd slowed their chanting, someone asked, where are their names? Tsunami, my firstborn, and Naruto, my second son, Minato said with a smile. Tsunami. Naruto. The crowd began chanting their names once more. Gradually, more villagers began chanting Tsunami's name until only his name was heard. Minato felt great, his family was whole, he was alive, and his twins were viewed as the heroes they were. He had been a little concerned that they wouldn't be able to distinguish between the jailer and the prisoner. He should never have doubted his people, and he wasn't concerned, even though it might be a little dangerous to reveal his marriage and his parental status. Iwa and Kumo would be too afraid that if they attacked the children, their parents would retaliate and bring repeats of the humiliating defeats the war had brought them and their countries. In fact, it was more likely that new alliances would sprout like mushrooms. He would have to deflect the proposals to his children, but somehow that didn't seem all that threatening compared to what he had been through. He had somehow managed to make it out after staring Kyuubi and the Shinigami himself. What human did he have to fear? It's amazing how a man can be both right and wrong at the same time. This is when the domino effect began, and the consequences for Konoha years later became apparent. Even though Kushina loved the two babies, they were extremely exhausting, and since her husband was currently busy planning Konoha's reconstruction, she was left to take care of the children alone. Kushina finally looked at the two babies sleeping peacefully. Kushina suspected the Kyuubi's chakra was at least partly responsible for the exhausting amounts of energy Tsunami possessed, and she was thanking God that at least Naruto was a quiet child who only cried when he really needed something, while Tsunami was a bundle of energy that couldn't be left unsupervised for even a single second. She was constantly crawling around, never staying in one place, and she cried more times in 10 minutes than Naruto did in a typical week. So what more could a mother ask for? Well, perhaps that the children got along a little better. They were 8 months old and appeared to get along fairly well, though Tsunami was obviously the more dominant of the two, except on the odd night. She had survived giving birth, her husband had survived something no one was supposed to survive, and their children were healthy. When Naruto first realized that he and his sister were different, he was just over 4 years old. Of course, there were differences. He was a boy and she was a girl, and they liked different toys, had different likes and dislikes, and so on. However, Tsunami had never been sick in her life, and his health was as normal as one of Uzumaki blood, with the occasional cough. Their father had explained that Tsunami had the mighty Kyuubi's chakra sealed inside her, which gave her greater healing and better health, while Naruto had its soul inside him. This made it even more confusing for Naruto, as he usually tried not to cry when she scraped her knee, and instead went to his parents, usually his mother, which she seemed pleased about because she always referred to him as a big boy. The Yondaime Hokage Minato Namikaze, his wife Kushina Uzumaki, Namikaze, and their twins Tsunami and Naruto were seen walking side by side, demonstrating their unity for one another. The girl was talking animatedly with her parents about her day's play, while the boy waited patiently for her to finish. Aside from his red hair, which contrasted with her blonde hair, both of them could be said to be the reincarnation of their parents. She was brash, bubbly, and high-spirited, and her attitude occasionally caused her problems that her brother would otherwise take care of and resolve. After that, we raced around the lake's shoreline, but I was the only one to finish first. As usual, Ni-san came in second, followed by everyone else. The only person who wasn't exhausted and could run on was me. The girl would tell these kinds of stories without realizing that her parents had used shadow clones to protect them and were aware of the adventures. I'm really proud of you, Tsunami. That's excellent. How about having some ramen for supper today as a treat for that? Yes, mother. Naruto realized that he and his sister were very different only now, after they had left the compound together as a family for the first time. Looking back, he realized that he and Tsunami had never left the compound together for as long as he could remember, so when he had been outside previously, people had smiled at him, and he had assumed that they would do the same for his sister. He was correct, but what he didn't anticipate was that they completely ignored him while his sister was present. The muddy ground prevented any serious injuries, but his once orange yukata now had large patches of brown. He sniffed. Naruto didn't really mind not being gawked at by strangers, and he actually felt pity for his sister who was caught in the center of this human maelstrom. Nobody seemed to notice his existence anymore, as everyone rushed to get a look at his sister instead. After noticing that the tug on his leg had disappeared, Minato looked down to see that Naruto was actually 4 feet away, rubbing his head and sadly observing his ruined yukata. His shinobi instincts made sure he remembered the face of a man who had rushed past him too closely, and he saw the civilian merchant elbowing his way through the crowd and yanked him back by the collar. "Hey, what's so important? What can I do for you, Hokage-sama?" When the merchant realized he had yelled at his village chief, his face had gone pale. Minato was frustrated. "Well, for one thing, you can apologize for knocking my son into the dirt and pay for the cleaning of his yukata. Lord in heaven, he had run the son of the Yondaime over. He would be unable to sell anything for the next week. I apologize. I was distracted by my thoughts." The merchant's gaze flitted around until he saw Naruto, covered in dirt. "The cleaning is on me, of course, and I will accept responsibility for this. If I can be of any further assistance." The merchant flinched when Minato shot him a chilly glance. "You will receive the bill within the next few days. And if the stains don't go away, you'll have to replace that pricey yukata." Naturally, the conversation between the merchant and the Hokage had drawn attention, and now that Kushina and Tsunami had seen that Naruto was still sitting in the dirt, Tsunami blinked, gestured to her brother, and laughed. Not because she was angry, but because he was so funny. Even though he didn't find it funny, Naruto couldn't help but laugh as he looked at his sister and then at his own clothes. Kushina shook her head and sent her kids back to the compound to change, while Minato went to a bakery to get his son something sweet to share with his family after that terrible incident. A few months later, when the family gathered for dinner, Kushina prepared their favorite dish, ramen, which Tsunami devoured in a flash, while Minato and Kushina, although more civilized, consumed the food only a little more slowly. Naruto, on the other hand, ate more slowly, enjoying every bite before swallowing it, which is also why he had just finished his first bowl of ramen while everyone else was at least on bowl 4. Naruto began, "Mom, can I please have a..." But Tsunami cut him off. "Refill, Mom," she joyfully yelled. "Young lady, how many times do I have to tell you not to shout?" Kushina sighed. "Well, that was the last of it," she said, frowning as she looked into the pot after taking it and pouring more into Tsunami's bowl. He loved ramen as much as the rest of his family, and Tsunami was eating her unworthy 9th filling, while he had just finished his first, and she was given the last bowl. Naruto blinked. His mother told him that interrupting someone was rude, so why was it acceptable for his sister? Naruto calmed himself. It was to be expected. He was exceptionally intelligent for his age, and he had already noticed that his parents seemed to love Tsunami a little more than they loved him. He wasn't beaten or hated, but they always cared a little more for Tsunami than for him. He knew that parents occasionally had favorites among their children, and that Tsunami was significant because she held the Kyuubi's chakra, but couldn't at least one of his parents love him more? His son Naruto followed her. He was good in his own right, analytical and calculative. If he hadn't also had Tsunami, he would have believed he was a true Nara. Minato, who usually felt exhausted and damned all that was paperwork, found this moment endearing for himself and his family. He noticed that his daughter was growing at an unusual rate and soon he would induce her into the training to become a ninja to begin the training. She stared at him, wondering what he was thinking, and then it dawned on her, "Kushina, I think it's time." "Really? Do you believe that?" Both twins were perplexed by their expressions and wanted to know what was wrong, so they said, "I don't know." "What are you saying, Dad?" Naruto, who was always polite, inquired. "I believe that in a few weeks we can start your ninja training." When they heard this, both twins' eyes widened. "Really? Thank you, Daddy, I'm so grateful. Thank you. This is fantastic." She added a few decimals to her voice while maintaining her typical joy. "The others are also starting their training and I was going to go crazy if you didn't say so soon," she said. "Yep, your mother and I will take turns showing you what are the ways of our clans and little by little you'll grow up stronger and stronger until you surpassed your mother and me." Naruto could see that his father was exhausted from the day's work, or that his mother wasn't paying attention to the conversation, but when he finished speaking, the words weren't directed at them both. Rather, they were directed at Tsunami. He would have assumed that it was a fluke, that his father would suddenly remember his son and look at him and smile that he wasn't forgotten, but he never did. He simply looked at his father the entire time they ate, expecting those simple words to be repeated back to him, but once again, they didn't. Kushina gave him a look and said, "Naruto, what were you saying?" "Nothing." Naruto blinked, got up, pushed his chair in, put his bowl in the sink, and walked away. Tsunami was absorbed in her bowl, unaware of the outside world, and Kushina glanced at Minato, who shrugged helplessly. As soon as he opened his eyes, Naruto felt terribly sad. The glance down was merely a formality to inform him that Tsunami had infiltrated his bed during last night's storm, so he likely had a few hours before things got bad. Then he saw that his room's door was open and that his parents were staring at them, probably thinking they were very adorable. Naruto turned to his mother and said, "Mom, can't you tell her to stop it?" Luckily, Tsunami woke up, saw her parents, and hurried out of the room. "Why?" His mother blinked. "It's adorable, and I appreciate how much my kids care for one another. When they are afraid, most kids get into their parents' bed rather than their brothers. I nearly feel envious." "You shouldn't be, Mom. It hurts," Naruto said with a grimace. "I always wake up feeling terrible after she sleeps here." "You know, I can understand that you think it makes you look less manly sleeping with your sister, but that's no reason to make up stories," Kushina scowled. He always said that, and there was nothing wrong with him. She had even visited a doctor the first time he said it hurt, and the man had assured her that there was nothing wrong other than a cold. You'll weed the garden as a punishment for lying. She knew it wasn't a severe punishment because Naruto loved tending to the garden. "But Mom," Naruto protested, opening his mouth. Before he could continue, Kushina interrupted, saying, "Naruto Uzumaki. Namikaze, I suggest you be quiet before you make your punishment worse than it has to be." Naruto shut his mouth, dressed, and strode past a smug, looking Tsunami to the garden. Naruto spent the first quarter of his time in the garden soaking in freezing cold drizzle because the storm had not yet passed. He was determined to complete the task, regardless of how unfair it was to be punished for speaking the truth. He was bedridden with a high fever for the next few days. It was Naruto's and Tsunami's 5th birthday. Normally, they would spend the day visiting each clan, giving them gifts, and then moving on until they arrived at the annual festival celebrating the defeat of Kyuubi. At midnight, they set off fireworks that lasted for more than an hour, and all the children were excused from school the following day to watch them. However, since Naruto had just recovered from a severe fever, Kushina and Minato decided that it might be better if they invited the guests to their house instead, so that Naruto would only have to travel to the festival and back, not exhausting himself. Although the congratulating crowds left no time for the twins to actually speak to each other, Naruto grinned broadly as he accepted the congratulations from everyone and even got to cut the cake, giving his sister an extra large piece with 3 strawberries on top because it was her favorite type of cake. Naruto opened his stack of gifts, not a little envious of his sister, knowing that she would receive more than he would because everyone in the village seemed to want to send her a gift. His mother gave him a shiny wooden sword for training, since they would begin shinobi training after their birthday, which was the biggest gift he could ask for, well, except for the free meal coupon Ichiraku's ramen had sent him. Tsunami received the same gifts, plus a few more, and was yelling with joy. The children were very happy to comply, and after the meal and gift giving, it was decided that Minato would activate the security seals to keep enthusiastic kids in and uninvited guests out before the 2 age groups separated. The adults stayed in the house, talking dull adult conversations, while the children went to play in the yard and training grounds, after making sure there were no forgotten pointy things lying around. It was a warm, sunny day. Naruto was lost in a book that he had received as a gift, so he was shocked to see that no one his age was around him when he looked up. He left the safety of the chair he was sitting in and headed to the backyard, where he heard voices. He was taken aback by the sun's position. It seemed like a few hours had gone by, and a small part of him fell away when he turned to face the ground. He watched his sister and all of their friends training and playing in the backyard, and he was forgotten once more. He was surrounded by his sister, playing, making fun of each other, and the girls were even chatting about Kami. Knows what? Even so, Naruto didn't notice, didn't care for that, and wanted to know why he hadn't been informed. Sure, he liked to read books more than play sometimes, but many people were shy, including the Aburame heir and the Hyuga princess. He set aside his thoughts, confident that he would join his friends in the playing and perhaps receive answers. Hey guys, how's it going? They seemed to not hear him. Therefore, he tried once again, louder this time. Guys, a tsunami, do you hear me? Once more they were on their own world. He got fed up and yelled, "Tsunami!" That caused them to halt. Tsunami turned back to face him, a faint smile on her face, but it was odd and seemed out of place. Where have you been, Naruto? I was reading some stuff in a book I was given. Geez, you're such a bookworm, little whirlpool. Is studying your only option? A few of them laughed at the moniker. She usually kept her little joke to herself, so he frowned at that. It was about genjutsu. I found it interesting. Why? What are everyone doing anyway? It doesn't matter. Our friends were back here, but you didn't tell me. Nobody said that, but some people had the grace to appear sheepish. Come on, little whirlpool, they are not to blame. Dad set it up. How about me? I'm not sure. He thought I should be first, as usual. Naruto frowned at the remark, saying, "You know I'm more social than you." He just didn't want to wait and wished to get me something to occupy my time, until you got your sorry butt in gear. A few people laughed, but Tsunami didn't notice. You hardly practice your katas before Dad starts training us next month, so you go hang out with them, which is the only reason you are more gregarious than I am. They didn't touch the bamboo swords again for a while. And you can't say that you are better than me at training because if I remember correctly I'm better than you in Kenjutsu katas. She didn't like it when he brought that up because it was one of the few things he truly was better than her. Their mother had just begun teaching them a few weeks prior, and when Tsunami discovered that her brother was better than her and she was making no progress, she demanded that they learn katas in another thing. Her mother complied, much to the surprise of Naruto, who always thought his mother was on his side. Tsunami drew attention to herself with a sudden clap of her hands, saying, I just wanted to say something. Thank you for attending. The children cheered and smiled at her, but Tsunami wasn't done. Wait. Second, I won't play with anyone who plays with Naru.ni because he said something hurtful about me. She turned to their friends and clapped her hands, saying, did everyone hear him? I didn't like that he was making her look bad in front of their friends, so I wanted to get revenge, no matter how hypocritical I was because I had done the same thing not long ago. We're twins, and Little Whirlpool is being a jerk and bullying me. I won't play with anyone who believes he speaks the truth anymore. They can all be friends with my brother, the bully. Naruto stared in disbelief at his sister. He had never once done anything so inappropriate as to bully her. Yes, he had said things to silence her when she made comments about him, but he had never bullied her. Looking around, he saw that many people had faces like a deer caught in headlights, so it didn't seem like much of a dispute, but the way she put it, anyone who supported him would be automatically considered a bully, and in addition, she was the more gregarious person, so there was no competition for her. The crowd began to move toward her, and only 2 or 3 of them turned back to apologize, but the general consensus was that Naruto deserved what he was being cruel. When their father returned outside to sort the refreshments and some chips for them on the table, he didn't look back at Naruto. Instead, he kept his eyes forward, focused on how the kids continued to play carefree, all but one, because he was forgotten. Naruto looked even more shocked that they listened to her, never once doubting his feelings. During the next 2 or 3 hours, Naruto repeatedly tried to play with the other children but was sent away. He tried to speak to Tsunami but was completely ignored by his sister, and finally, Naruto simply gave up and sat by himself in front of the ground's small, shallow pond, flipping rocks over its surface. When Naruto's parents arrived to take their children to the festival, he claimed he was tired and didn't want to go. Thinking it was due to his fever, they let him go to bed and left him some medicine and tea, which he later poured down the drain. The other kids left for the festival, with Tsunami being the only one who felt a little guilty about her brother's absence, but the festival quickly brushed those feelings away. Naruto had long since cried himself to sleep, and she had spent the evening with her friends at various stalls, playing games and winning toys, before falling asleep at the end of the fireworks and being carried home. He hoped it was for both of them because, as their mother and father had promised, a training set was shown to introduce them to shinobi life. Lately, his father had more time for his sister than for him, and while it was only small things at first, like talking to her or asking her a question and forgetting to include Naruto in the conversation, Naruto, being Naruto, just took it in stride and continued to read the books he carried with him. Then, when his father was picking them up from a friend's house, they would hardly wait for him. They hadn't forgotten him, they simply walked faster than he did. Tsunami was bouncing up and down, barely controlling her excitement, confident that she would make them proud, and that she would only do what was best for her parents. Their parents then asked Tsunami to go outside to the backyard, where there was a simple white marble terrace. 4 feet from the door was a diamond-shaped pool, 3 feet deep on the shallow part and nearly 6 feet deep on the deeper side where the south edge of the diamond ended. A few toys and chairs were set up at the right end from their side to accommodate their needs and friends whenever they arrived, and on the left side was a small passageway leading to a large rectangular table made of redwood, where their parents were waiting for them on the benches on either side, while simple reclining chairs waited on the shorter side. "Good to see you here." With a secret smirk, their father remarked, "I was starting to think you didn't want the training." "No way, Dad. You promised me this, and I've been waiting for it ever since." She was born first, but that didn't mean he was any less or worse than her. Okay, so maybe she was taller than him, but if their lives were any indication, he got the smart side of things. "I'm doing this, not even Little Whirlpool would stop me," Naruto said, a tiny tick appearing on his forehead. "Tsunami, unless the next time you get stuck on a 30-foot tree and no way out you wish to stay there, shut it or it won't help you." "Did you hear that, Daddy? He said he would not assist me in any way?" The Hokage scowled slightly. "Naruto," was a harsh voice. Naruto had never heard his father use it against him. "How can you say something like that? Express regret to Tsunami right now. How could a brother fail to assist his own sister?" She made fun of him, and he responded as usual with a clever retort, saying, "What? How the heck did it come to this?" It was a first, but the young blonde didn't find it shocking. For some reason, he couldn't help but think that things would remain that way for a while. "I apologize." He caught a glimpse of Tsunami grinning at his situation out of the corner of his eye, and he noticed that his mother wasn't even paying attention to what they were saying. "All right. I've given you the training list to complete now. Your mother will teach you everything she knows about chakra, its components, how to mold and control it, and how many different kinds there are while I'm working on the tower. Because of a bloodline, she has certain traits that set her apart from other clans and individuals. She will explain and demonstrate these traits to you all, and she may even check to see if any of you possess them. I'll demonstrate how to use chakra, its training components, and its application to jutsu when I'm here. We'll begin by working out your bodies as well. You will surpass all of your classmates by the time you get to the academy." Naruto saw it again. His father was staring at her instead of them. Tsunami, as usual, hid all the attention, but she seemed indifferent to it and seemed to exaggerate her ego. "What about Mom's sword style, too? Like her, I want to train in it." His father laughed and said, "I don't see why not if your mother thinks you're good at it and worthy." All eyes were on her, and she gave him a displeased look because she knew her daughter was not yet ready for the style and might never be. "We'll see. Kenjutsu after all of this," she said. "Yes. Come on, I'd like to get started." Hi. Kushina followed, hardly looking at him, as they moved deeper into the backyard where their training field was, being dragged by his daughter. Naruto was pissed. Sure, anybody that looked once at him wouldn't notice. He had a poker face that would rival an Anbu mask, set in stone. In his eyes it was another story. They looked pissed, annoyed and angry. He was sure that another second of that and he would have lashed out at anybody within 5 feet. The reason? He was forgotten in any sense of the word, however you wanted to express. The truth was, no matter how you put it, he was forgotten. His father, as he would call him in his presence, had once again started training his sister before he had returned to his home. His mother had to take a deep undercover mission that would last a few months, depending on any hassle. They were now 6 years old. His stature was now on par with his sister, but he was sure that she would surpass him once again she hit puberty. However, that didn't matter to him, he would catch up. It was the fact that thanks to her, he couldn't do anything he usually did. His father had taken to sending a shadow clone to the tower, while he was with them, and personally trained Tsunami in her glorious and spectacular way. Once again, it didn't faze him much. She really needed the help with ninjutsu because of her huge chakra pool. It almost rivaled her father's, but with the little control she had, she constantly oversaturated her jutsu. When they first did the tree climbing exercise, she had fallen on almost every part of her body, repeatedly whining that it wasn't working, while Naruto did it in less than 20 tries thanks to his smaller pool. She had been furious, saying he was cheating, and once she had it down, she asked to move to another thing without practicing. Their father complied, but Naruto declined. He wanted to perfect it. After completing this for an entire hour, he began using the katas his mother had shown them for an additional hour. He then repeated the process with leaves on his face and neck, spinning and moving them up and down his body. When he was satisfied, he moved on towards water surface walking practice. His sister had done fairly better in this one since she had bundles of chakra, and yet he did it faster than her, which irked her to no end. Their father, to please her, started training her in a few simple E-rank jutsu: the body replacement jutsu and the transformation jutsu. The clone jutsu was out of her reach with such crappy control, and once again, she wailed and whined until her father promised to train her in the shadow clone jutsu. Naruto kept it inside, not wanting to express his thought on the matter. Experience had shown that doing so would have a reprimand on his father's part. Once more, he did the same on the water surface walking practice as he did on the tree climbing exercise, and even found that it seems easier than anything else. Perhaps he had a water affinity, because he was pretty sure that no matter what, his feet should get wet when he walked on the water, yet when he reached the shore they were as dry as sand. He had decided to keep quiet about it, no doubt another thing his sister would complain about, and he did not want the attention on him. What annoyed him was that, although he was only 6 years old, he had gone to the library to research genjutsu practice. His mind and imagination were full of ideas, and he wanted to experiment with them. When he wanted to leave, the librarian had the gall to stop him and call him a thief, but he told her that he wasn't and that he was just looking for information on genjutsu. She snorted at that, saying that children wouldn't understand such material, to which he replied that he was smarter than he appeared. She laughed at him, calling him a liar, and stating that only Lady Tsunami was born and that she had never heard of any boy being the Hokage's son. He began to yell, losing his composure, something he had never done in his life, and was expelled from the library. That was the tipping point. He had planned to break into the library at night, and because he was aware of the shinobi patrol schedule, he had it all planned out. When he got home, he felt a part of himself crumble as he watched his father and his sister practice their shadow clone jutsu. She seemed to have a better grasp of control because she barely summoned 100. He spoke to her for a few minutes, and Naruto barely heard what he was saying before he saw it. The Rasengan. Naruto wasn't foolish. He understood that his father was going to teach her one of his most valuable jutsu. He didn't care Naruto wasn't there. He left because he couldn't see this. Carefully watched the patrol to see if anyone shifted or if someone did something unusual. They may have noticed his ears looking more refined and the low, almost imperceptible growl that escapes from his throat, but this was the first shift that occurred in his unfair life, the first of many dominoes that would come tumbling down, and perhaps the most influential, as you could see how his irises shifted, elongating, turning from black to red while the rest of his eyes remained blue. The Kyuubi were waking up. A huff informed him that he had hit the target, and he jumped to his feet, but his attacker had already recovered. Naruto grunted as he was slammed against the ground, pushed himself on all fours, and kicked his left leg behind him. He blocked 5 punches and sent 3 back before being forced to his knees by a knee to the gut. Minato's voice echoed, "That's enough, both of you." Tsunami leapt back, and Naruto stumbled a little before rising. "Well done, you too, Tsunami, especially you. The majority of girls are weaker than boys, which surprises me." While Naruto growled, Tsunami puffed up her chest and said, "Well, most girls don't have a demon in them that makes them stronger." Naruto. Minato looked at him. "What? Remember how Bawako-san herself stated as much." Minato couldn't argue with that. He had asked Bawako to come over and check the kids, to make sure there were no issues that could interfere with the start of their shinobi training. Bawako had found that the Kyuubi's chakra, tiny amounts of which seeped into Tsunami, was strengthening her bones and muscles, making her tougher and stronger than the typical boy her age. She had mentioned that while Naruto and Tsunami had been around, only Naruto had really paid attention to her. Minato acknowledged, "Yes, it's true, but that doesn't mean you should rub it in." "Yes, it does. Otherwise, she'll view it as a personal achievement," Naruto said, nodding. "Tell the truth, father. Who would have prevailed if Tsunami had been a typical girl? In fact, if she had been a typical boy?" "You Naruto, and don't swear," Minato sighed. "Your brother is right, Tsunami. You simply took the attacks and continued to strike throughout the entire spar, never dodging or blocking any of them. This quickly put Naruto, who did dodge and block, on the defensive." So, Tsunami blinked. I still prevailed and it didn't hurt. That's true, Minato said, glancing at her, but this was a bare-handed spar. You will almost always be up against an experienced opponent in real combat who is armed, even if it's just a kunai. Additionally, you will be sliced to ribbons before you can do any harm if you battle them the same way you battled your brother. If you have a knife in your chest or have lost your head, not even the Kyuubi's chakra can help you recover. Simply dashing out hits and depending on the fox's chakra to heal you of any misfortune is your plan. That's fine now, but it must change. According to your mother, Naruto consistently defeats you during sword training. She said, only because mom always calls the matches before anything happens. Tsunami was offended. No, she calls the matches when one side receives a blow that, if you were using real swords, would either kill or cripple them, Minato scowled. Naruto simply strikes those spots by taking advantage of openings. Nah. She called matches when Naruto hit my shin or arms, Tsunami said, shaking her head. Well, you can't fight without arms and feet, can you? Minato asked, glancing at her. After pouting, Tsunami eventually said, no. See, was that so hard? Minato said, ruffling her hair. Minato didn't notice the obvious affirmation on Tsunami's face, but she said, now, let's move on to jutsu. Practice. The secret of Tsunami's success, of course, lay in the fact that simply because the Kyuubi's chakra was sealed inside her, Tsunami had unnaturally large chakra reserves. She could go on when Naruto had to take breaks, and more importantly, she could afford to use 5 times the chakra needed to get the jutsu to work, while Naruto had to work on his control to get it to work. Of course, Naruto tried to tell her that if she could train more in her control, she wouldn't need as much chakra, but she dismissed him, saying that she would never run out of it. Of course, that also meant that Naruto could stand and move expertly on liquid surfaces by now, while Tsunami was unable to simply walk up a tree and instead needed a running start. Although Tsunami was upset when she saw her brother walk over water or simply climb vertical surfaces to avoid her, she didn't see the need to improve her control because she was proficient in the jutsu they were taught. Naruto's attempts to argue otherwise were interpreted as bullying, and his parents didn't support him in those arguments either, using the old adage, any problem that I can safely ignore is not a problem, which meant that as long as Tsunami was able to perform the jutsu, they were happy. To their parents' defense, he and his sister were 6 years old, but Naruto still failed to see the harm in pointing out a problem before it became a habit and was even more difficult to fix. Genjutsu was what Naruto loved, and he found that they just came naturally to him because of his good control, which he practiced frequently, and his very creative mind. Kushina had taught them the fundamentals, but because Tsunami was unable to dispel even the most basic ones and kept complaining, she had, much to Naruto's dismay, chosen to stop teaching Genjutsu until they were a little older and, in Tsunami's case, more mature. After a few hours of wandering around the village, upset by the abrupt loss of his passion as a lesson, Naruto met a member of the Kurama clan, who were renowned for their Genjutsu skills, and asked him for advice. He had to ask the older boy to dango, something his savings had not yet fully recovered from, but he had received his tip, which would turn out to be one of the most significant influences in young Naruto's life. Flashback: the Kurama had stated that Genjutsu is distinct from all other forms of jutsu, including Fuinjutsu, Taijutsu, Ninjutsu, and Kenjutsu. You see, you can easily learn from a master with all of those, and if you have the talent, you might even be able to outdo him by applying what he taught you. Just as you can easily become a ninjutsu master using only jutsu created by others, you can also become a taijutsu master using only taijutsu that you were taught by others, provided that you possess enough chakra, talent, affinity, and, of course, determination. However, Genjutsu is essentially distinct. You will never be able to use what your master has taught you to surpass him, no matter how hard you work or how talented you are. Naruto had given him a look. Why not? The man grinned and said, easy. Genjutsu is a type of jutsu that is practiced by using one's imagination. Beginners to upper mid-class people use hand signs, which are only meant to help you concentrate. However, those hand signals are specific to you and are something you use. Although someone who is aware of the Genjutsu's intended function can cast them using hand signs, doing so actually lessens the power of the technique because it diverts attention from its real source, which is your imagination. A single finger, a sound, a gesture, or even no indication at all can be used by true masters to cast a Genjutsu. In essence, the Genjutsu that you have developed yourself are the most impressive, the hardest to break, and the ones that work best for you. Simply put, a novice who creates his own jutsu may, and has, cast a superior Genjutsu compared to a master who employs someone else's creation. If you truly want to succeed in Genjutsu, Ask what the jutsu does instead of asking for hand signals or instructions, and then practice until you have one that works. Although it takes more work, the benefits make the effort worthwhile. Contrary to nearly everything his mother had taught him, Naruto blinked. But aren't hand signs essential because they regulate the flow of chakra? So, without precise chakra work, a genjutsu shouldn't be effective, right? The Kurama had chuckled. Yes, and that's why genjutsu practitioners require excellent chakra control. Only if you lack the control to move the chakra on your own do you need the hand signs. The higher level genjutsu can withstand that, but those with miserable control lack the control to cause such a disruption within themselves, which is another reason why they are unable to break genjutsu on their own. Additionally, any focus will work. Hand signals are not necessary. We actually have a girl in our clan who is the most gifted person we've seen in a long time, and she focuses on drawing pictures rather than using hand signals. You might need a focus at first, but in genjutsu, it doesn't really matter what that focus is. It is significant for ninjutsu because the hand signals also relate to specific aspects of nature and aid in improving your focus, but that is a different matter. As a result, Naruto began developing his own genjutsu, testing the innocuous ones on random bystanders and the more powerful ones on animals. And there was another thing that fascinated Naruto, although that was even more difficult to learn. While alone in the house, his father training Tsunami outside, Naruto had walked into his father's library. While Minato had installed seals that ensured nobody he didn't authorize could pull a scroll out of the drawer and that nobody could remove a scroll from the library, he also had the bad habit of leaving things lying around. Naruto discovered that seals, while immensely complex, were actually fairly simple in concept. There were certain rules and guidelines for seal work, which could be bended to a certain degree but not broken without dire consequences, and as long as you followed these, you actually had a lot of freedom in what you do. Of course, Naruto would need a deep understanding of seals before he could do anything that was even a 50th as complicated as his father's Hiraishin, but the most basic things Naruto quickly learned to do, the entire concept of sealing somehow making complete sense to him. All in all, Naruto was by far superior in genjutsu, fuinjutsu and chakra control to Tsunami, while having a slight edge over her in kenjutsu, due to the fact that he actually dodged and blocked. She was better in taijutsu, although simply stronger and faster would be more accurate, and also superior in ninjutsu, thanks to Kyuubi's increased reserves. Her problems with control were avoided, and when it became clear that the way things were going, Tsunami would never be able to use a clone jutsu. Their father decided to teach her the shadow clone jutsu, a jutsu perfect for people with high chakra and demon chakra stopping information overload. Tsunami had taken to it like a fish to water, while Naruto had nearly killed himself when in a fit of jealousy. He had tried the jutsu in his room, managing 3 clones, which dispelled themselves to give Naruto back his chakra, as voluntary dispelled clones return everything excluding exhaustion to their creators. Naruto had learned his limit and the shadow clone jutsu's secret there and then, and never created more than 2 clones tops, usually 1, who then trained chakra control or read available scrolls and books while he focused on genjutsu, fuinjutsu and physical fitness, in that order. Naruto had actually taken the shadow clone jutsu apart, figured out what gave them their independent minds and abilities to send information, and combined the sentient mind with a type of bunshin that had no physical body but didn't dispel when hit, creating a new jutsu with drastically reduced chakra costs. His Genzo Bunshin had the cost of a low D-ranked jutsu and took no more control than one needed to stick to a wall, yet nobody took him seriously when he presented it. They explained that it wouldn't do any good against an experienced shinobi, despite the fact that Naruto explained he had intended it to be for shinobi beginning their career, to which it would have been a very useful jutsu, since the clones were transparent to the caster, an unintended side effect. Naruto had even created another jutsu based on his first one, a C-ranked jutsu requiring a water walking level of control, the Genzo Bunshin no Yoroi. But the only thing that Naruto got when he tried to present his work was the order to not use ninjutsu in a taijutsu match, although his father seemed happy that Naruto had started crafting jutsu, even if they currently were useless ones in his opinion. While Tsunami spent most of her free time training with her many friends, Naruto spent most of his free time developing his chakra control, creating seals, or practicing genjutsu. He could quickly recreate the simpler ones, but he was working on a much more complex one, not realizing how soon he would need it. After that story Tsunami had told on their birthday, Naruto had become somewhat of an outcast in his age group, something that Tsunami had begun to actively encourage. Complications rose from his mother's mission, and when she arrived a month ago, alone and bloodied, she was sent to the hospital where they induced her into a coma until the day before. She was too weak to help with their training, barely able to walk on account of not moving for 2 months. His father had taken to inducing Tsunami into a more rigorous training. Some said that the experience had made him fearful of the same happening to his sister. They were right and wrong. His father took it upon him as an excuse to start training Tsunami in her Jinchuriki powers. She had produced the initial state at an extraordinary rate. Perhaps with her father's help she knew the exact mechanics on how to best do so. It didn't matter because he was proud of her and goaded her into doing better every time. She would keep that appearance in front of friends and family, but Naruto knew, he knew how she became afterwards. When alone her personality took a full swing, the other way, and she became ruthless with him. Her demeanor and way of talking him down served to demoralize Naruto on aspects of his ninja career such as ninjutsu and taijutsu. With her stamina and chakra pools, she had a wider repertoire of jutsu than him. Granted, she didn't do them that good, all use them to her whole potential, but she beat him and berated him on occasion. On a chilly February day, Naruto and Tsunami, who were now 6 and 4 months old, had established a routine. During the week, they would get up, get dressed, brush their teeth, and start their exercises before their mother, who kept things simple, tutored them. After lunch at 1 p.m., they would have free time until dinner was served at 4 p.m., at which point their father would be home and they would train for 2.5 more hours before the day was over and the siblings would wash and go to bed. On weekends, they were free to choose whether they wanted to train, study, play, or simply hang out. Minato worked Saturdays and portions of Sundays, while Kushina spent every other weekend with friends, leaving the kids unattended. One Saturday in particular, Naruto and Tsunami were by themselves in the house after returning from a shopping trip, with Kushina returning because she had forgotten to buy a crucial dinner ingredient. Tsunami and Naruto were in the kitchen unpacking the shopping bags when they heard a swooshing sound. They both spent enough time throwing kunai to recognize the sound of one cutting through the air, so they both jumped off the chairs they had used to reach the higher drawers. When they turned around, they saw a man wearing a headband with rocks carved into it. Tsunami summoned a small army of clones, thinking that would be enough, but she was stunned and froze, and it was only Naruto pulling on her arm to get her to run that turned the third thrown kunai into a grazing shot rather than a kill. The clones, knowing what they were much braver than the originals and had no trouble starting kamikaze attacks, which bought them a little time. Naruto's goal was to reach the front door, then the gate, and then they would almost be out of the woods, because there was always some shinobi on the road, usually more than one, and every chunin knew a jutsu that served to call for backup. Naruto knew they only had as long as it would take the man to destroy the remaining clones, which would likely be in about 20 seconds if the regular poofs coming from the kitchen were any indication. When a shuriken sank into her calf, Tsunami, who had been little more than deadweight the entire escape, cried out in pain, noticing that her surroundings were becoming blurry and wondering if she was poisoned. In fact, he was able to leave the house before the Iwa.Nin caught up with them. When Naruto saw that the Iwa.Nin had drawn a tanto and was swinging it down, his eyes widened in horror, and he knew that he wouldn't be able to dodge in time. Naruto knew that he wouldn't make it, even if he left his sister behind. He made a few hand signals and prayed to all the gods who might be listening for this to work. After noticing the boy's initial hand signals, Jin Nader, a former Hunter.Nin member of Iwa, drew his tanto and swung it downward, concluding that whatever the boy was planning, he would not complete it. Even though Jin detested the Yondaime, the man who killed his mother, father, and 3 older siblings, he couldn't help but feel sorry for this child, who most likely couldn't comprehend what was happening. It sliced through flesh and bone, leaving a deep diagonal gash from left collarbone to right hip. The boy didn't appear to be in pain, but rather was in disbelieving shock. "Kid, nothing personal. Your father is the target of this." He slashed the boy's throat, causing the blonde child to collapse in a gurgling heap. The girl attempted to open the gate, but before she could do so, Jin's tanto pierced her heart. Jin took out the blade and, just to be safe, slashed off her head with a single blow. He was blown back by a chakra wave that burned on his skin, but he was unharmed. He opened the gate and started to run, knowing that he had only a few seconds before the chakra burst would startle someone. It was relatively easy to escape Konoha because the chaos had left all the shinobi on duty perplexed, but 10 minutes into his escape he discovered that he had pursuers, who had arrived sooner than he would have liked, but in reality, he had a better head start than he had anticipated. He had set up traps along the entire route back to Iwa, from exploding tag arrays to camouflaged seals that would shoot poisoned senbon at those pursuing him, as well as a few safe hiding spots. The Konoha.Nin had been approaching him steadily for perhaps 20 minutes, and by now he could actually see flashes of them. The Hyuga was nowhere to be seen, which was a great relief because it meant he could use one of the 20 hiding places that a Hyuga would have spotted him in right away. The Inuzuka and Aburame were concerning. and Jin had sustained several cuts and grazes from projectiles aimed at him. However, he didn't give up, knowing that they were getting close to the first trap. A straightforward array of 10 exploding tags, which would be set off in just a few. Boom. Such a satisfying sound, especially when accompanied by the screams of the dying. Even Deidara would not have been able to beat that. While he wasn't stupid enough to go look what he hit, a rough head count did show that only 15 of the former 40-headed squad was still on his trail. While his route leads him towards Kusa, the traps slowly reduced his pursuers' numbers, although they had gotten more careful after that first explosion. When he put his biggest plan into motion, he had gained more ground, with maybe 7 followers left. He reached the river and started to run over it, suddenly making an 80 degrees turn to the right, jumping into a prepared hole in the muddy shore and closing it seconds before his pursuers reached the river and ran across. There was a short pause while the trackers searched for his scent, until they started running off in the opposite direction. Jin had walked that route 100 times to make sure his scent was on the trail. It led to a clearing, where a rain of poisoned senbon would go down on them. He had left a communicator there so he could hear when they reached the clearing, determined he would not crawl out until they had reached it. Then the relieving rustling of feet rang through his headset, and Jin bolted, running on the river for a few seconds before running towards Taki to reach Iwa. The hunt had gone on for 20 hours now, and Jin was starting to use chakra pills and concentrated caffeine tablets to keep moving. He listened to the voices in the communicator, grinning at what he heard, only irate calls at first, followed by startled sobs when the senbon went off, and one piece of information in particular caused him to both gulp and smile. Kushina. Sama. She is down. Damn it, where are the medical professionals? They perished in the initial explosion. Fuck it. Bring Kushina. Sama to Bawako. Sama immediately. You two, come with me, you two. For this, we're going to get that motherfucking bastard. Do you still have his trail, Inuzuka? I believe he deceived us. The tracks don't sound as new as they ought to. At the river, he got us lost. They would never return to Konoha in time. As Jin kicked into a higher gear, had Kushina Uzumaki, the Red Death, Uzu's Crimson Whirlpool, been hunting him? His escape was a miracle. But she was struck by the senbon, and from the sound of it, a lot of senbon, each dipped in a poison that killed in less than an hour. With the final few traps and maneuvers to lose them, he was free as a bird, and getting rid of the last 3 had been equally easy. He had led them into a trap that, though not deadly, covered them in something like fresh skunk juice, and now they would never be able to track him. 4 days after leaving Konoha, he made his way directly to Iwa, where he was greeted as a national hero by the Tsuchikage, a staunch enemy of Konoha, who greeted him with all the pomp and circumstance. Soon after, Iwa learned of the death of Kushina Uzumaki and the suicide of the Yondaime after losing his entire family, and the ecstatic leader named Jin his successor. The greatest reward, though, was the admiration of the female gender, and after a steaming night with 3 beautiful women, Jin finally fell into well-earned sleep. There was a commotion in Konoha. How had this occurred? An attacker from Iwa had entered the Namikaze compound without permission and attacked the children. The Namikaze compound. How on earth did he enter? A dog? Masked Denbu asked, glancing at the 2 motionless children's bodies. The bastard had them covered. Hokage. Sama suspected that he sneaked in when Kushina Sama left the compound to get the groceries she forgot, said a rookie wearing a tiger mask. He replaced the seals right away, but the damage was already done. So, what happened to him? Inu asked, nodding. The children began to stir as Tora shrugged. A high-class genjutsu. He was a little difficult for Ibiki to remove. The man fought to stay in it, he said. It must have been a dream. I wouldn't want to stay anywhere where I'm not Ibiki's new toy, so I don't blame him. So who put him under it? Kushina said, irate and afraid of losing her kids. That's the big question, isn't it? Minato shrugged. As much as they would like to claim credit, the Kurama clan said that at the time in question, none of their members were outside their compound. Although there are some people who are skilled in genjutsu, Itachi being one of the first to spring to mind, all of them claim they had nothing to do with it and have no idea what was used. It was either self-made, personalized, or forgotten. Kushina said, you don't think one of them, as her gaze strayed to Naruto and Tsunami. According to Itachi, it's possible, but if so, then we have a genjutsu prodigy on our hands. He appeared thoughtful. Inu appeared more uncertain. I'm not sure. There are geniuses like Itachi here, of course, but they are usually recognized. Unlike ninjutsu or taijutsu prodigies, who can practice alone without anyone observing, genjutsu prodigies in particular must practice their jutsu on others. Itachi nodded. Practicing on other people is necessary for genjutsu users, but it doesn't guarantee that they will be noticed. The person may not even be aware that they are under a genjutsu if the jutsu is sufficiently subtle. The attacker would have been able to break free from the genjutsu because he was wearing the insignia of a jonin. The jutsu must have been so subtle that he was unaware that he was under it. Using his reasoning to ensure that he was unaware that he had been apprehended and being amiable enough to prevent him from attempting to refute it out of extreme desperation. Additionally, he has a few wounds that would have dispelled a genjutsu, which gives the mind no explanation for the injury, indicating that some minor injuries must have been ingrained. To have all these effects, the jutsu would need to be at least a B rank, possibly an A rank. However, neither of them got this kind of instruction, Kushina said, shaking her head. After teaching a very low rank genjutsu, I had to stop because Tsunami was becoming increasingly irate over her inability to perform it. Although Naruto picked it up rather quickly, the compound only contains a small number of genjutsu related scrolls, and they are never taken out. It couldn't have been Naruto or Tsunami because they didn't have any knowledge of genjutsu. Do you think it could have been? Inu asked, glancing at Tsunami, the fox. After giving it some thought, Minato said, Kitsune are renowned for being cunning and skilled illusionists. Naturally, we have never heard of Kyuubi possessing any genjutsu abilities, but it's possible that the fox never encountered a circumstance that required its use. Just like Tsunami's shroud, the chakra activated the jutsu and served as self-defense. The shroud may have had long-term sensory memory and remembered the Kyuubi performing such genjutsu, which is essentially what the Kyuubi needs in order to use its powers. That appears to be the only reason. Wouldn't that mean that there should be at least some traces? Itachi asked, unconvinced. For one, Yuki. Residue? We are still unable to approach some parts of Konoha because the debris that remains there is so dense and hostile to humans and other living things. Even after all these years, 3% of Konoha has been declared uninhabitable since the attack, and you're telling me that the newer trails disappeared in a matter of minutes? Do you have an alternative justification? Kushina inquired. None so far, Itachi acknowledged. Still, I can't help but think that something we don't know happened here. And I agree, Minato shrugged. However, even the Iwa.Nin won't be able to assist us with that if what you said is accurate because he wouldn't be able to determine when his memories are a genjutsu. Naruto was furious because he had spent months perfecting that one genjutsu so that he could finally show his parents that he had something special to show them, and now that he had actually activated Zeku Sakai, pushing himself to the limit of his chakras in the process, his sister, of all people, was given the credit. It was unfair, of course. Tsunami didn't deny anything, because she didn't know any better, but now she was walking around with her head even more bloated, threatening to put him under her super awesome genjutsu if he didn't comply. Naruto had laughed her in the face, only to be disciplined when his sister began to cry and tell Kushina that he was making fun of her. Even worse, Tsunami had discovered that their parents and the teachers at the ninja academy they had recently begun visiting didn't trust Naruto when his and her words contradicted each other, especially if she had witnesses. As a result, she had begun to play pranks and blamed Naruto, and naturally, the other kids joined in, claiming to have witnessed Naruto's actions. Some other pranksters, such as Kiba Inuzuka, had begun to do the same thing, indicating that Naruto was gradually developing a reputation as a troublemaker, even though he had done nothing wrong. Naruto even thought about pulling a practical prank on someone, just so their parents would, for once, yell at him for something he actually did. He once retorted, because I don't want to take credit for what I did or blame others for what I did. It had led to a week of house arrest. Life was really awful. Naruto was unaware that his 7th birthday would bring about yet another U-turn in his life, and this time it would not be a good one. When their instincts alerted them to the fact that they were no longer alone, Minato and Kushina were soundly asleep in their bed. A real Western bed, not just a futon. And the anxiety vanished as soon as they recognized Tsunami's footsteps before she pounced on them both. Oh no. When he opened his eyes, he saw that she was fully clothed and wearing a heavy jacket because winter had arrived early this year. The only thing she was missing were her shoes, which were forbidden to be worn inside the house. Minato called, exaggerating the pain that Tsunami caused. She jumped up and down on the bed and grinned at him and Kushina, saying, "Come on, get up. Nearly 9 o'clock. I'd like to see my pals. Let's leave, let's leave, let's leave." Okay, we're getting up, Minato said with a laugh. Looking at her daughter, Kushina said, "Are you not interested in opening your gifts first?" "Nah." Tsunami said, shaking her head. "They don't go anywhere, so I can open them later. I'd like to see my pals." Tsunami jumped around like a rubber ball on a sugar rush, talking non-stop and telling her parents to hurry up before literally dragging the laughing adults outside while continuing to talk non-stop as Minato and Kushina shrugged and dressed. Naruto blinked as he got up, realizing that he had really gone overboard the night before. It was his 7th birthday today, and he usually got up early to open his presents that his parents had left in the living room because they didn't want to be woken up that early. It would likely take months to complete, but his first self-made genjutsu had given him a sense of how it worked and what he had to do, so he was confident that he could finish these new ones faster. He had read through several scrolls that the blonde woman with the diamond on her forehead had left behind, with a dictionary and an encyclopedia for some of the more complex words, and discovered a few things that had led him to write down the basis for 2 new genjutsu that would be as good as Zeku Sakai or even better. He had worked on some seals after he had gotten those ideas somewhat worked out, and then he went to bed at 3 in the morning. He would only need to build up his reserves so that doing them would not be a gamble that always left him unconscious and only worked once every 5 tries. Although he was proud of himself and that he continued pushing his limits to surpass them, Naruto had made the wise decision to try his genjutsu one last time, just to be sure, and was disappointed to find that he didn't have enough chakra for it, and that the first time had likely been a fluke caused by adrenaline increasing the amount of chakra in his body to beyond what was normal and safe. Of course, by now, he could do it without fainting, but it was very draining, and the whole situation had essentially been forgotten already. The day before his birthday had been so fascinating that he knew he should have taken it a little easier, but it seemed like he was still the first one up because he couldn't hear anything. Not even the sound of birds chirping or leaves swooshing in the trees. It was too quiet. Last night, while his mother and father were talking about something he couldn't currently recall, he felt weak and excused himself from the table, but no one else noticed except his sister, who appeared to be grinning at him. He didn't care at the time and simply went to bed. After waking up, he went to the bathroom to freshen up because he was extremely exhausted. His muscles seemed to have fallen asleep like him, just like in his dreams with a demon, where he ran and ran without ever stopping, despite all of its yells about its power and how it would possess him. Time seemed to slow down in his dream for an hour or perhaps weeks, but he never got caught. After brushing his teeth and splashing water in his face, he finally realized that the house was quiet. He was certain that it was late, so he knew it was late. He walked slowly to his sister's room, but no one was there. He saw some clothes lying on the floor and a small bag full of accessories, but he didn't even glance at them. He went to his parents' room, and the same thing happened to them. Their closet was open, and clothes were lying around. He began to panic, thinking that someone had robbed them, but it couldn't be because his father's security seals were the best in Konoha, if not the country. No one could break in, not after the incident. No one could have been there, though. His mother did appear to be feeling better yesterday. He hurried to the stair, jumping 2 by 2, not caring as long as he saw them. He entered the kitchen, the first thing to his left that went into the living room. Happy morning. He was hungry from hardly eating, but he temporarily forgot about it. Perhaps there in the living room, Tsunami might just be playing with her toys, and maybe father and mother just went out to get a birthday cake or get Tsunami's friends. Where's Break? No one was there. The kitchen appeared clean, everything used yesterday was cleared out. He discovered that there was no one in the living room again, so instead of allowing his paranoia to worsen, he calmed down. They must have all gone out. Choosing not to have a panic attack, he went back to the kitchen and made himself a sandwich and some juice before going back to his room to continue studying his genjutsu and fuinjutsu. I'll just focus on this some more, maybe by the time I finish they'll come back. Naruto didn't realize that he had fallen asleep on his desk as he began to eat and study his seals, forgetting his concerns until he woke up. When Tsunami asked that they go to the hot springs for her birthday, Minato and Kushina had to admit that they were stunned by such a simple request. Normally, she would ask for a lot of gifts, but this one turned out to be nice. When asked, she said that she also wanted her mother to unwind and enjoy the day, like a mother-daughter moment. The trip lasted from 2 to 5 days. They couldn't get enough of it. When they got back to the house, it felt like they had remembered something, but neither of them could identify it, so they didn't imagine the image that would appear when they entered their porch and Minato unlocked the seals that prevented them from opening the house without their chakra. Yeah, Tsunami really had a good idea for us to stay for a few more days. I mean, since I woke up I've never felt better and... At that moment, both of them reacted as though they were in danger and positioned themselves to protect their daughter. They searched every nook and cranny that had a dark spot before Naruto materialized in front of them as though using a genjutsu. I was wondering when you would come home. You know, a child can get pretty lonely, scared and worried if none of his parents are there for 5 days. Their voice sounded so monotone and lifeless that they had trouble recalling it, and that's when it finally clicked. Their faces turned pale as if struck by each of his words as they were delivered. "Naruto?" Kushina inquired. Both of them flinched at the statement. "Ah, mother, it seems you've remembered your son first. Pray tell, where were you all this time?" Being the sweetheart that she was, Tsunami didn't read the situation before responding, saying, "They took me to the hot springs. We had originally planned to stay for 2 days, but it was so wonderful that we ended up staying for 5. You really ought to have been there, Naruto." She was standing behind their parents, but neither of them could see her face because they were too preoccupied with going back in time to figure out when they had last spoken to Naruto. It was clear that they were unable to see her face, which was smeared with a sneer like a self-righteous princess. "Tsunami, stop talking. You aren't part of the conversation." He wouldn't rise to her taunt. By the look on her face, she wasn't sorry he wasn't there, probably orchestrated the whole thing. Even so, for parents to forget their own child, it went to them the fault of him being alone? Well? While Misfortune was working double shifts to catch up with the workload, Naruto's luck had taken the day off the first time and then for a whole week. When he woke up and discovered no one in his house, he became desperate, even thinking for a moment that Tsunami actually had genjutsu better than his own and was using them right then. He started to explore the house again before attempting to reach the door, and that's when he noticed it. It failed to open. Minato had added the seals to make sure that at least the neighbors slept, and the first ones were up without any issues, including the sound blocking seal, which made sure that no one outside could hear what happened inside. The sound blocking seal had been put there back when Naruto and Tsunami were babies and the latter had frequently cried the entire neighborhood awake. Unfortunately, Naruto was unaware that the house automatically went into lock down when the gate was sealed shut and his parents' chakra signals were not nearby. All doors and windows closed and were unopenable until the gate was opened and they returned. He had screamed for assistance and attempted to smash the windows, but his small frame and strength would not have been able to help because the windows were made of reinforced glass and had reinforcement seals. His parents had left a few cans and food in the kitchen. They must have cleaned it all in the last week and were planning to refill their stocks when they bought their stuff for the party, if there had been one. He tried to ration it out, but some weren't good for his taste buds or digestive system, and by the 4th day, he didn't have any more food. He was alone, scared, and terrified, and no one was with him, came for him, or noticed him. His feeble breathing was the only sound to break the deafening silence, and the world had turned into a dark blur. Everything was so cold. Although Naruto was unable to see it, outside Konoha had been hit by a small snowstorm without warning, and his house was on the wrong side of it. There seemed to be so much snow that the house actually appeared to be painted white, and it had gotten even colder. Even though his body was already too weak and worn out to shiver, Naruto managed to hold on to life despite his body gradually shutting down because of one thought. They will arrive soon. Please wait a little while longer. Even though Naruto could not see the fireworks blooming in the sky like giant flowers through his window, his mind knew instinctively what they were because of the booming and the sudden eruptions of color in the blur of his vision. The 4-day festival was over, and it was midnight. It has been more than 3 days since his birthday. Though he was far too weak to laugh, he understood and let out hollow chuckles. They forgot that I even existed. Although he was aware that his parents had occasionally forgotten about him during stressful times, most likely due to Naruto's ability to blend in with the background and become invisible, as well as the fact that Tsunami hogged and hoarded all available attention like a miser hoarded money, he had never considered it to be this bad. Naruto sobbed for the first time since he woke up that day of regret. A poof rang through the air, and a giant toad with a white-haired man riding it appeared. Their faces told him that they recognized him, that they understood what had happened, and that it made them feel even more exhausted. The toad, Sage, Jiraiya, has arrived. When he called, the parents immediately sheathed the weapons they had drawn automatically again. Neither of them actually turned to face him. Their bodies simply did it on autopilot, but their brains were still in shock. "Jiraiya, Uncle," Tsunami shouted, jumping at the man who sometimes visited and always told her funny stories. "You were in town." Jiraiya chuckled. "I just got here. It would be impossible for me to simply pass Konoha without giving you a birthday present, could I?" With glittering eyes, Tsunami raised her head and said, "You have something for me?" "Of course I do," he said, ruffling her hair. "Who am I, in your opinion?" "Well, your parents told me that you have incredible chakra reserves, so I will grant you the honor, the once.in. A lifetime opportunity to." Jiraiya puffed forth his chest. "Get the toad. Contract signed." "Yay. I get to be just like Daddy," Tsunami exclaimed as her eyes widened and she leapt to her feet in delight. "Now, Tsunami, a summoning contract is special," Jiraiya said, shaking his head and calling forth the toad that held the contract before unfolding it. You must leave a blood stained handprint after signing your name, yes, your entire name, with your blood. Then, like your father and me, you get to call forth toads. When Tsunami learned that she would have to sign with her own blood, she scowled, but she quickly overcame the fact and sliced open her hand to write in blood. Then she turned to Jiraiya and asked, "How do I summon?" Jiraiya grinned and said, "Your father should tell you that now. When you're ready, he'll make the decision." "No fair," pouted Tsunami. She yelled, but her parents remained where they were, so she fled to boast to her friends. Jiraiya chuckled once more before turning to face the world. Well, Tsunami received her gift. Where's the other one, then? The little redhead who's quiet. As they turned to face him, Kushina and Minato's faces lost all of their color and returned to reality. Naruto. Kushina muttered, "We just left him home," unaware that they had already reached it. "What do you mean? You left him alone," Jiraiya said, blinking. "I've heard that he likes to cause trouble, but don't you think that punishing him on his birthday is a bit harsh?" "We didn't punish him," Kushina said, shaking her head. "We failed to remember." Not believing what he was hearing, Jiraiya blinked. "You forgot your own son? On his birthday?" Minato appeared utterly unsettled on his own. We. When we awoke. A tsunami. So much mayhem. Needed to search everywhere at once. Spent 5 days at the hot springs, and during that time, there was never a moment of silence. "Aw shit," they said, turning back to face the door, but the boy had already vanished from view, and the door had shut once more. By that point, Minato had somewhat recovered his composure. "Well, what will we use as an excuse?" he asked Kushina. "He probably won't forgive us until he graduates," Kushina said with a feeble smile. "We must find a way to compensate him. How about we don't punish for demolishing the house, which he has probably done by now?" Minato laughed, though it sounded a little strained. Kushina gave him a stern look and said, "Minato, I'm serious. He has every right to be extremely upset, and he must be. How could we overlook him?" Minato became serious now. "I'm not sure. Tsunami practically dragged us out the front door and to her friends, starting with the most demanding and hyperactive ones, after we woke up, still half asleep. Before the hot springs, we had never truly experienced a moment of tranquility, and we consciously chose to forget the existence of children at that time. Although it's not really an excuse, no one brought him up prior to our return." Kushina scowled. "Naruto is such a shy person. He remains in the background at all times. He is present, but he doesn't behave as though he is. He doesn't seem to have many friends. Doesn't it worry you that none of the kids even inquired as to Naruto's whereabouts?" Minato nodded, but before he could say anything more, they arrived at the house's door. Jiraiya saw his hesitation and asked, "What's wrong? Are you bracing yourself to see your home in ruins? Or are you concerned that the door may have been trapped by him?" "No," Minato said, shaking his head. "No windows or doors were opened during the lock-down period." Apparently, Naruto had chosen to vent his rage indoors. He opened the door and panicked before he even looked inside. "Well, that too, but I'm getting a bad vibe." He touched the door and the seals, which glowed, and Minato received a brief report. It was a disgusting sensation, one that they hadn't experienced since the Kyuubi attack. It was accompanied by anger, hatred, rage, hostility, oppression, loneliness, unhappiness, animosity, and darkness. After gasping at the stench, Kushina hurried through the door, fighting the urge to scream. From the front door, which appeared to have several scratches where someone had attempted to open it, there were bloody handprints, barely the size of a 7-year-old's hands, leaving a trail on the wall that led around the interior. Kushina hurried away, while Minato gaped in disbelief. No door opened. Not a single window opened. They cannot be opened from the outside and all closed during lockdown. There is no way to open the windows or the door. However, where was the source of all the blood? Jiraiya glanced around, noticing blood splatters on the frame and scratches on the inside of the main door. "Minato, take a look at this. The frame has blood on it. They were mixed with scratches. He was attempting to get away by scratching. In his despair, he most likely forgot the utensils and knives." With his mind seemingly still unable to piece together what was happening, Minato turned to face his former instructor. However, it is feasible, but..." Minato and Jiraiya ran to the left side of the house after hearing a heartbreaking scream. They noted the condition of the house, including broken furniture and bludgeon objects near the windows, cans that were open, and an even more intense feeling that came from deeper inside. Kushina was holding her child, which she had discovered leaning on the west wall of his room. Based on the blood on the wall, including the larger stains where he had rested, he had apparently attempted to break his window so that he could shout or wave at someone to notice him. He must have had something sharp for such dentures. Although that was a commendable display of will, Naruto was wearing a thin sheet when she found him, and his eyes were unfocused and dull, with tears leaving their marks on his inhumanly pale skin. Kushina wailed. She was rocking back and forth while holding her son. He's chilly. He's really aloof. Help from Minato. When her husband came, she looked up to see a face marked with nameless terror. He whispered, "Kami in heaven, have mercy." The snowstorm. It must have had a terrible impact on the house. The house lost all of its warmth when we were gone, and the heaters stopped functioning. After glancing between them, Jiraiya clapped his hands loudly and exclaimed, "What are you two doing? We must get him to Bawako immediately." The most upset of them all was Jiraiya, who, now that he thought about it, had no contact with the boy but could honestly say that he had nothing to do with the boy's fate. He was the only clan visited by the trio and, shamefully, the first and only one to inquire about Naruto's whereabouts. However, if he was being honest, he only remembered when he had allowed Tsunami to sign the contract so as not to appear to favor one sibling over the other. When they got to the hospital, where Bawako always lived during these celebrations, they heard that a woman dropped a glass she was holding and let it break on the floor because there was always someone, usually a 2 to 3 digit number of some, who drank more than they could handle. "What on earth did you do to the child?" Angrily, she inquired. "I implore you, save my son," Kushina said, still holding her dead son, as she turned to face Bawako. Bawako glanced at her and said, "I want an explanation later." After removing Naruto from Kushina's arms and placing him on a stretcher with a mobile table attached, she moved a chakra-covered hand to his head and then to his chest. She ripped the jacket off of him and touched his chest, and her eyes widened. "Dear Kami," she muttered, "he's too cold." Then her eyes widened again. "His heartbeat is fading. Don't ask me how, but he's still alive. He's leaving us." She placed her hands on the boy's chest, sending weak bursts of lightning. "Chakra to keep the heart going," before looking at the nearest doctor. "Prep me a room ASAP. He won't be around for long." Bawako and a group of medical professionals drawn by the chaos rolled Naruto after the man as he nodded and fled. Jiraiya and his parents were not permitted to leave the reception. Bawako returned to the waiting parents after almost 7 hours of surgery, both shinobi style and old-fashioned. Jiraiya had gone to the Yamanaka household and parked Tsunami, saying that he couldn't stay at the Namikaze compound for a day or two due to a private emergency, which was true, and he had left before any questions could be asked. Jumping to her feet, Kushina hurried to the elderly woman and asked, "How is he? Tell me he's all right, Bawako." Bawako snorted, "He's not at all right. But okay, I'll tell you everything before I insist on telling you what happened." She inhaled deeply. He was severely hurt, specifically his arms, which were almost completely soaked and suffering from extreme hypothermia. His body temperature in his limbs was only slightly warmer than freezing, and in certain places, the temperature of his skin was even lower. The boy should be dead by all standards and every medical text ever written, but we've managed to stabilize him. A foreign chakra that became lodged in his wounds and stopped the blood from clotting was one of the causes of his significant blood loss. Surprisingly, the boy's brain is unharmed and he will survive. That's the end of the good news. Minato looked at her after they had both sagged with relief. "Why? As you say, there is no mental harm, and he will fully recover because he knows you. You've made things worse." "No, I haven't," said Bawako, shaking her head. "There was no brain damage," I added. "There will likely be a great deal of psychological harm. The boy must have been conscious to have clung to life for so long, as the wounds had been open for hours, probably a day or so, from what I could see. I can therefore state with honesty that he will never be the same." Biting her lip, Kushina said, "Can't we eliminate the traumatic memory?" "Not without completely changing his mind," Bawako said, shaking her head. "Physical changes will result from this, and he will question where he got them. This will quickly destroy any block we erect. It's pointless unless you want to change every memory in his mind to make him believe that's how he's always been. We can only suppress memories, not erase them, so even then, there's no assurance it will hold true." "What physical changes?" Minato asked, glancing at her. With a heavy sigh, Bawako said, "His career as a shinobi is almost certainly over." Looking up, Jiraiya asked, "Why?" Bawako gave him a look and said, "I probably could have restored the boy to a nearly fully functional state if you had brought him in right away, or at least no more than 12 hours ago. However, I had to decide between saving his life and saving his arms when you brought him." Minato went pale. "What are you saying? Whatever happened to his arms, it was bad," Bawako said sharply. "The majority of the blood vessels were severely damaged, and all the muscles were torn. Furthermore, A lot of tissue has just died because the boy only allowed blood to flow to that arm, which saved his life. Clearly, the boy's actions were only intended to last a few minutes, perhaps an hour. All things considered, those arms are merely bones covered in skin. The arm lost mass because of the numerous large tears in the skin. I should be able to fix all of that in a week or so. But his chakra coils sustained the actual harm. How bad is it? Damage to the coils is always bad. Those were a shinobi's lifeline, and if something was wrong, especially in such a vital area as the hand, the shinobi in question was a sitting duck, unable to use any jutsu requiring hand signs, Jiraiya said, looking at her with no trace of his usual cheerfulness in his eyes. They are nearly totally broken all the way up to the shoulder, Bawako said, turning away. To gain extra strength for whatever he wanted to do, he must have been using chakra in his hands. He merely directed the majority of his chakra toward them, if not all of it. That kind of pressure is too much for the body to bear. It lost heat because it lost chakra. His body didn't react quickly enough to send blood clots, so he lost heat. They are irreparable, and even if they miraculously grow back, it will be crippled. He might never again shape chakra. He will be able to move them with time and therapy because the nerves didn't take much. However, if they move as they were, it will take a long time. He may be capable of learning kenjutsu and taijutsu, but he will be harmed by anything else that requires chakra. A great deal. All three of them flinched under her intense gaze. Whatever you did, it basically left Naruto a temporary, if not forever a cripple, she said. Minato, Kushina, and Jiraiya were seated in front of Bawako in her office, all of them extremely anxious due to the twitch in Bawako's brow. So let me see if I got this straight. When you two woke up that morning on their birthday, Tsunami was hopping around on your bed, rushing you to hurry up so that she could see her friends. In your drowsy state of mind, you got dressed and left with her, completely forgetting that Naruto was sleeping only a few feet away. Has something like this ever happened before? Is occasionally forgetting your quiet son in favor of your loud daughter on the list of things you do, or did you just pick a lousy time to try something new? Her voice was full of sarcasm. Kushina nodded while crying. It may have happened once or twice. Naruto is just so quiet. You completely forget he's there, especially with Tsunami around. When the Namikaze family came to Bawako for a checkup, Bawako herself had taken 5 minutes to notice Naruto was present, so she couldn't deny that part. Anyways, you sealed the compound when you left, to ensure that no assassin sneaks in while you're away and hides to kill you in your sleep, like that man from Iowa a few months ago. With that thought, once again you forgot him and continued on. What about the seals on the house? Minato appeared uneasy. A spike or surge in a seal. Array is usually the first warning that something's wrong, but with him inside the house, the seals just assumed him part of the house, or that he wouldn't leave. But the other seals that are directly connected with me and Kushina didn't notice our presence after 12 hours and went into a standby phase. During which everything from the heaters to the appliances also shut down. Also, not only the gates, doors and windows, but the walls in my entire house are connected through that array, which means there are almost 10,000 individual seals that went into protection in detail. I would have to carefully analyze to find the one seal that is the main component and change each one connected to it, so that the kids would also be recognized as part of it and not deactivate. Since they were usually with us, I didn't find the reason for it. Jiraiya gave a nod. That is how it works. A surge would suggest that one looks over his arrays in the house, but it didn't happen, hence they didn't know something was wrong. Bawako let out a sigh. Anyways, you then visited a dozen or so compounds, and because all of the children running around there, you didn't have time to think of Naruto. And nobody in any of the compounds asked where Naruto was either, or even had a present for him. Is that right? She got slow nods in response. She inhaled deeply, and then you went to the festival, where practically the entire village welcomed you, and again, nobody thought of Naruto. You let the kids run around, and when you had your free and calm moment, you and Tsunami decided to leave to the hot springs and pretend your problems did not exist, is that right? And Jiraiya, who I know has been in the country for at least 3 days, decided he'd rather go peep on women in the minor hot springs rather than visit his godchildren. Meanwhile, Naruto got stuck in his own house, with no heat, no food and no one to help or hear him, and spent his entire birthday and following week alone. And let's not forget, the only present he got that day, the ones locked up in your compound don't count, was a crippling injury and the end of his career as a shinobi, long before it officially began. Does that about sum it up? The three of them exchanged glances. They couldn't really say anything because that was basically what happened, even though Bawako's way of saying it sounded awful. They then nodded slowly. Bawako appeared on the verge of losing her temper, but she controlled it with unnatural effort. She inhaled deeply and peacefully. She pinched her nose and turned to face the door, asking, "Name one reason why I should not pick up this desk and whack you all with it until you look like triplets." "Taji, I don't care what you think about it, I need sake right now." In the end, Taji had been listening in and, for once, genuinely agreed with Bawako. Alcohol was an excellent friend to rely on when things like this occurred. She brought 2 cups, one for herself and one for Bawako, along with a bottle. She didn't drink a lot, but you don't hang around with Bawako for years without learning how to control your alcohol intake. After finishing her first cup all at once, Bawako turned to face the godfather and her distraught parents. "You've caused a wonderful mess. Now you deal with it. You 3 decide which one of you gets to explain to Naruto that he might never be shinobi, and especially why." She then got up and left. The door closed and the room fell silent. Naruto opened his eyes slowly. He didn't really care that the ceiling was strange. Inside, he felt empty. Only by sheer will did he attempt to sit up. This was where? This was a place he had never seen before. There were red velvet walls all around him, with balconies at the top that faced his line of sight. He became aware that the color of the walls in the aisle he was sitting in were the same. There were rows of chairs on either side. He identified them as seals because they all had the same pattern of figures. However, why would a theater have seals? Why was he in a theater? Even better. He got to his feet, finding that he was free of the accidental but self-inflicted wounds. As he looked ahead, a long rope that was the same color as the room appeared. It fell directly in front of the stage, concealing whatever was behind it with a heavy curtain. He just went to it and pulled it, not knowing what to do. He was surprised by what happened next. In fact, the velvet curtain began to separate from itself. It was no longer joined together, and its sturdy, thick columns pressed themselves together to reveal bars and gaps that looked out into the darkness. He just didn't know why, but something prevented him from continuing. A second rope appeared at his left, with a little lights note at the end. To see what's inside, perhaps. He pondered. When he pulled it, he was looking directly at Kyuubi no Yoko. He collapsed onto a chair. "Kyuubi?" he asked, feeling scared. Right now, it didn't matter that he was forgotten or what had happened to him outside. There was only one thought in his mind. He stood before the strongest monster on the planet. So my jailer finally decides to come meet me. I had wondered for some time if I should choose to just continue to sleep away. Had you taken any longer and I just might have. Tell me, jailer, are you afraid? He appeared weak. He was hardly able to finish his sentence. As though depleted of all his possessions. He abandoned those gloomy thoughts. Right now, he had more important things to do. Are you really the Kyuubi? What happened to you? You look so weak. The Kyuubi's eyes widened, and his strength briefly returned. You dare call me weak? I'm not such a thing, human. I could easily destroy you just like. He began to cough. It appeared ill. Naruto wanted to give it a pitying glance, but he was stopped by its glare. Were it not for this infernal seal and my lack of chakra, I would have done so much sooner. That man really thought that it could keep me locked away. He continued to cough, but more lightly. What happened? Naruto was genuinely baffled. When he looked at it, he somehow stopped feeling so afraid. Perhaps because it was confined behind bars. Perhaps because it appeared so ill and frail. Perhaps simply because, like him, it appeared weak and lonely. What do you think, human? Do you know what I am? I'm a sentient mass of pure chakra. To collect and store chakra from everything in my path. I live as long as their chakra. Yes, I can be killed, but I cannot die. What do you think happens when that accursed Yondaime made a seal that actually divided me from my sustenance? My way of living. I'm a hollow form. Without it I'm powerless, and it without me grows rampant. Naruto's eyes widened as he studied it. It seemed impossible. He was somehow sustaining a dying monster. It meant just that. Chakra was necessary for its survival. The same could be said for him, if Tsunami was any guide, as the Kyuubi's chakra flowed and purified into her. He was being used as a battery by it. It makes sense why, given his age, he had so little chakra. At least a high-level Chunin chakra, possibly elite Chunin, would be present in a typical Uzumaki. To anyone familiar with shinobi life, the disparity was astounding. He only possessed mid-level. It would be much simpler to use his Zeko Sakai ideal world without that. He appeared angry all of a sudden. You're using me as a battery. You son of a bitch. You are the reason I'm so behind in ninjutsu, and why my Zeko Sakai drains me so much. Why I'm so behind, Tsunami. Why I'm so left behind by my parents? Shut your mouth, human. I do not care for your petty problems. I do not care how you are treated by others. They took away my chakra, my life force. It is the same. They used me to have a super soldier, and now I'm using you to keep myself alive. Whether I admit it or not, I have a need of you. It sighed, overexerting itself. By the middle of its speech, it had raised its head a few feet and then let it drop carelessly. Perhaps simply exhausted. Naruto was at a loss for words. That was not how he could respond. It was the reality. Although the Kyuubi attacked the village and was sealed, it wouldn't be in this situation if it had all of its chakra. However, it said a few simple words that made Naruto no longer feel sorry for it. He was necessary. He had never heard those words. Phrases that conveyed his significance and recognition. That no one forgot him. It just looked at him and gave him a slight, barely noticeable nod. You said you needed me, right? Then how can it be I could do such a feat? I mean, you said so yourself. You need chakra to live. Mine can't be how you survived through it. As much as I would love to brag that I have extraordinary chakra for my age, it can't be enough for you, can it? It turned to face the boy. There was a flash of wonder in his eyes. A little deference. For a person. Naruto grinned in embarrassment and said, "You are right, human. I can say that I'm surprised at your understanding of such matters." That made Naruto sad. For a puny human, that is. There was a slight smirk on the fox's face. Naruto stared at it in confusion and said, "It is true that I cannot continue to live this way with your chakra, but I don't have to. That other human, the girl that has my chakra, she's part of the reason I'm alive. Do you remember when you slept with her? How the next mornings you would feel awful. It seemed abysmal, didn't it? You just thought that she hurt you in your sleep, on purpose or not, right?" Naruto gave a nod. She did and she didn't. Because of her I didn't need you all the time when you were younger to drain your chakra, or you would have surely died, with me in the process. She injected my chakra back into you, and subsequently to me. A dangerous process, I assure you. Her doing so, made so that my chakra forced itself more and more into her coils to accommodate itself. With the seals in place, my chakra was in a sub-par space by her coils. In each division it would leak a bit of mine and forced both to combine. She was in a lot of danger, I imagine. Continuing that way would have made my chakra to pump more than necessary and possibly kill her. It would leave her body and either disperses itself into the surrounding affecting it, it would do the same but without the filters of the seal and leave this hole under quarantine. Concentrate itself and form once more my figure without my restraint and destroy anything and everything in its path. Or finally, in my favorite, it would flow back into your body, overpowering and destroying the seal, freeing me and killing you, and I lay rampage throughout this whole pathetic village. Glee plastered its face with a tiny smile as it imagined such wanton destruction, while Naruto looked terrified beyond recognition. Why? You're serious? It asked. Then why hasn't it happened? It would have, I guarantee it, but then your mother, the fox spat out, looking momentarily irate. Came from that dreadful mission. Your father started training her into using my chakra and she got accustomed to it fairly easily. She might come to you from time to time to relieve the pressure, whether she know it or not, and I can continue to use that bit, without using yours. Right now I'm almost out of it. A few more weeks, a few more days, who knows? But by then I will need yours once again. That phrase was there once more. I will need you, he said, feeling a little shiver of joy. How about that? He asked with a sardonic laugh. To think that the one, who is the main reason for my pain, is the one that needs me the most. All the Kyuubi did was stare at him. It didn't rise to the occasion if it was a taunt to exhort itself. I suppose I can't kill you, can I? After all, you die, I die. Your courage is impressive, little boy. Yes, I suppose it's true. I am in need of you, human. Naruto thought for several minutes. It was just too much to handle. He was needed by a Biju. It recognized him even though he knows it only sees him as a battery, a necessity for survival. Despite the fact that Naruto was forced to accept it against his will. Naruto felt significant to everything that had transpired, and what had been done was done. He thought he could get along with it, so it didn't consider him an enemy, anyway. It would not want to be alone since it was confined inside. Naruto was all too familiar with that sensation, and despite being the strongest monster in the nations, it was still capable of feeling lonely. Do you wish to be free? For a moment, it stared at him, attempting to convince itself that he had said nothing incorrect, that the boy had no intention of deceiving it. It failed to notice that, with a note of curiosity in his voice, the boy was genuinely just asking him. Of course, what being would love to be imprisoned in such a way? Even I have a wanton for the fresh air, to feel the earth as it crushes itself under my weight and power. I wish to be again under much. Naruto gave a sympathetic nod. What about your family? Of course, it doesn't matter that I hate Shukaku, or that Matabi scares the hell out of me with her hormones. They are my family, whether I want or not. Everybody has a family. At that, Naruto's perspiration stopped. Do you wish to be reunited with your family? There's always someone like that in your family. Quote. Yes. He closed his eyes as though making a decision, saying, very well, then. The firm promise that altered the course of history was, we will grow stronger, we will reunite your family and extinguish the idea of Jinchuriki. Naruto opened his eyes slowly. He didn't really care that the ceiling was strange. He recalled the incident. The fox, who was somehow able to sense other people's intentions and feelings, informed him of what was going on outside of his body. Realizing it was pointless, he sank back into the cushions after attempting to sit up. He was incredibly weak. Had Tsunami once more slithered into his bed, it didn't mention it before he reappeared, but it would have undoubtedly benefited the Kyuubi. No, he was by himself. Furthermore, he couldn't be in his bed because this wasn't his room. What brought him here? Then he gradually remembered it. His own recollections of everything, not the Kyuubi's version. He recalled his emotions and the powerlessness that came with being by himself. That for 5 days in a row, they forgot about him. He recalled scurrying around, trying to smash the windows with the lamps in the living room acting as lances. Scratching at the door hurt, and he was so depressed that he hadn't considered using anything else. The excruciating agony in his arms. He had a vivid memory of that. The majority was a blur. The sounds of the stunning fireworks that signaled the festival's conclusion and the unmatched cold were the main things he recalled. The darkness was broken by loud booms, and the silence that seemed to last forever was broken. For the entire day, his entire birthday, and those 5 days, he had been lying on the floor, and no one had come to get him. His parents had simply left him to bleed out and starve every second. Even if Tsunami remembered, Naruto wouldn't be surprised that she remained silent. She was getting intolerable. A part of him, however, still found it hard to believe what had transpired. A part of him still believed that parents would always be there for you when you truly needed them, but that part was crushed because that part was disappearing faster than his gluttony. Prone's sister could finish a bowl of ramen. Naruto's gaze lowered to his arms. They had been cast. He had a suspicion that his muscles were either disfigured or broken. Probably the tissue and blood veins as well. Fortunately, he no longer required hand signals for any of his genjutsu other than Zeku Sakai. Even though they were only low ranking, he needed to focus, make eye contact, and make some clear gestures for it to work, but a success was a success. Especially since Naruto was now alone. Although he was aware that his parents, who must have brought him here because they were the only ones with the ability to open the door, would most likely not abandon him, Naruto would be the only person he could trust and depend on going forward. And the fox, perhaps. He would never again allow anyone to deceive him in the way his parents had. Speaking of the devil, the door opened, allowing Naruto to see 2 red and yellow patches with 2 people attached. It's odd to note that Naruto didn't feel any more emotion when he saw his parents. In fact, it seemed to diminish. Kushina and Minato came into the room. They were shocked to find Naruto awake. Bawako had stated that she was unsure if this would occur within the year, depending on how long Naruto's mind would take to recover from the shock. Did his nearly instantaneous awakening portend well for his recuperation, or was it unfortunate that it took him only a few hours to overcome the sense of having been essentially left behind by his parents during his most vulnerable moment? Minato swallowed. Hi Naruto. The boy remained silent. Bawako had stated that the boy would likely feel very weak due to the amount of blood he had lost, so it was unlikely that he would be sitting up if he woke up before the day after tomorrow, but the silence was unsettling. He just lay in bed. Kushina gave it another go. How are you feeling? A fraction of an inch was raised on Naruto's brow. It was a dumb question, and Kushina cursed herself. Naruto's eyes were oddly vacant as he gazed at her. How long? He inquired at last. Kushina gave a blink. How long until what? Naruto answered, until my arms are healed. Minato and Kushina looked at one another, neither of them wanting to deliver the news. Minato gave a grimace before responding slowly. It'll take time. A lot of time, I'm afraid. For now, you may want to learn how to operate with care. Naruto nodded slowly. The bones in his arm were likely little more than splinters without the muscle to absorb impact without all the blood and tissue, if his suspicion was right. It would likely take weeks to fix everything, and after that, he would need to undergo rehabilitation. Overall, it would likely take months before he returned to his usual self. Kushina shifted around. She begged, "Naruto, sweetie, please speak with us." She could not stand this silence any longer. Naruto gave her a look. "Fine. Where were you this last 5 days?" Kushina appeared to have been slapped. "Aye. Minato assisted her. We regret this, we really do. Tsunami said it yesterday, do you remember?" Naruto gave them a questioning glance. "My Genzo Bunshin no Yoroi must have been the one. I had no idea it would go on for so long." They winced when he said, "I was not awake, at least not consciously." Naruto glared at his father and at her. He closed his eyes and let himself drop into the darkness, ending the conversation from his perspective. "I waited, but you did not come. My birthday passed, the storm passed, the fireworks went off, and you still weren't there." Kushina was ghostly pale. Although her lips moved, no sound came out of them. Did Naruto truly remain awake until they returned, going through what Bawako claimed could only have been hell and waiting for them? Minato took his wife's shoulder, looking just as pale. It took him 3 attempts to speak because his mouth was so dry. I don't think he wants to see us right now." After Kushina gave a nod, they departed. Neither of them slept that night. Bawako gave Naruto the all clear to return home 3 days later, but with strict guidelines to take it easy, avoid exerting himself for more than 5 minutes at a time, and avoid applying any pressure to his arm or attempting to channel chakra with it. Naruto nodded, realizing that the arm needed time to heal. He wouldn't just sit back and watch his muscles deteriorate, of course. He would continue practicing his genjutsu and do brief bursts of light exercise. The doctor didn't say things like that without a reason, so he wouldn't channel any chakra into his arms, but the rest of his body was open to attack. Additionally, he could practice seals without straining his body. Additionally, he could protect them until he could write again if he strained his memory. Fortunately, this situation would not affect his calligraphy. He was still able to paint and draw, though not very well. He needed more practice because he had just started and it had taken him some time to learn how to mix colors and create a picture without ruining the canvasser himself, but no one could claim he had no interests outside of ninja work. As artists were among the few who roamed around and raised no red flags when examining locations in detail, it was also the ideal disguise. He worked on his artwork over the course of the following week, but those improvements were short-lived because he was able to create an intricate array that, by his standards, called the paint back into its jars after Naruto finished. He was able to practice without wasting paint or canvases, saving money, and in secret because all Minato and Kushina saw when they walked in was a blank canvas. The remnant of something that Naruto had supposedly intended to start but never actually did. Another benefit was that it kept everything tidy. His arms, however, were a nuisance at the moment. Although it didn't hurt, it was a disability that prevented him from doing some of the things he wanted to do, including swordsmanship, unarmed combat, and jutsu lessons, which left him with a bad taste in his mouth even though he no longer really expected anything from his parents. According to Bawako, he was unable to channel the chakra or form the hand signs required for new jutsu because he lacked a hand approach. As a result, Tsunami was gradually beginning to surpass him in those areas, particularly now that his parents could give her full attention during those lessons and correct her errors. Naruto was still upset about being sent away after attending the regular lessons, though he chose not to disclose it to anyone. Flashback: his mother was standing in front of him, looking remorseful, just as he was ready to enter the dojo. "I'm sorry Naruto, but right now, you're in no condition for swordplay." Naruto felt agitated. "Why not?" Kushina let out a sigh. "Naruto, I'm not trying to be mean, but you're not in a condition to fight. Your left side is an obvious weakness you can't defend. Your right can barely hold it for so long. You can't even correctly hold a sword. Please understand, it's just not possible." Naruto's face became expressionless. He said sourly, "And whose fault is that?" When Kushina opened her mouth to speak, her words became stuck in her throat. Naruto averted his gaze, muttering, "Never mind, I understand perfectly." He turned to leave. Even though it made him even more resentful, he was not shocked when his father stopped him from practicing jutsu a few hours later, claiming that he couldn't because of his arm. Even though Minato was unaware that Naruto knew that they could at least allow him to learn the fundamentals, the signs, and how to use it. After saying something akin to what he had said to Kushina, he walked away. Knowing that Naruto was upset, Minato and Kushina tried to find the courage to tell him the truth when they met up in the evening. That he couldn't be a shinobi and that his arm would never truly heal. They were both concerned, but they didn't even acknowledge to themselves that they had cancelled his lessons to keep him from going on a rampage or running away to live as a ronin or something. They knew that because Naruto was intelligent, he would be less likely to flee and end up dead despite having no true talent or skill. Nevertheless, a negative feeling persisted in both. And however, that did not imply that Kushina and Minato did not watch out for Naruto. On the contrary, once he got back home, he was always surrounded by at least one of them, unless it was time for the now exclusively shinobi duties or tsunami training, who watched out for him and helped out wherever he needed it. That would have been Naruto's greatest dream just a few weeks ago, but now things were different. Now that they are bothering Naruto with their guilty conscience, they are buzzing around him. Since he didn't want to see their faces, he honestly started to wish they would just act like they always had and leave him alone so he could spend time with his sister. That's not to say he didn't take advantage of opportunities when they presented themselves. On his first day home, he asked and received written permission from his father to use the library. The man would have likely signed his own execution because he was so overcome with guilt after witnessing his son drag his body into the house with his left arm barely covered in bandages. With that permission, Naruto had made the most of his time outside the house, mostly in the library, but he also just wandered around Konoha. Despite the fact that the Anbu were becoming bothersome, it provided him with much needed relief from his family. Tsunami was gradually becoming intolerable when it came to his family. When her parents were around, she was smart enough to avoid doing anything but giving them sour looks, but when she was by herself, she was acting very nasty. She kept making fun of his injury and boasting that she could still take lessons, which really annoyed him, even though she couldn't blame him for any practical jokes at the moment. But something was happening, something he was unaware of. The first clue was when Naruto was out and about and happened upon a training ground where members of the main branch of the Hyuga clan were presently honing their skills. He had stopped to examine the display. If one compared the damage they could inflict on a particular level of skill with the style, it was, after all, the best taijutsu of Konoha. With minimal training, no other style of taijutsu allowed its practitioner to inflict the same level of damage. Naturally, one of the Hyuga had glanced in his direction after he had stood there for a few minutes. He initially gave off the impression of being angry, but after giving him a close look, he developed what could be called sympathy in his eyes, and he and the others simply ignored him and continued their training. Naruto was unaware that, despite the fact that no one discussed it frequently and the kids were unaware, word had spread throughout the village that the Hokage's son had been permanently crippled and was now unable to become a shinobi because he couldn't even properly mold chakra. As is often the case with rumors, this one, like many others before it, got out of hand until everyone thought Naruto couldn't even feel his arm or produce chakra. In order to feel some connection to the shinobi life, he watched others practice things that were forever out of his reach out of a masochistic craving. This is how the Hyuga and everyone else he would observe over the next few weeks saw him, not as someone spying on their training. His existence was, ironically, most tolerated by the harshest clans, the Hyuga and the Uchiha, who both felt sorry for him because he had lost what they regarded as the most valuable gift, the capacity to use chakra and move one's body appropriately, and left him alone as long as he didn't cause trouble. What could one boy do, after all? Since he was the Hokage's son, they didn't teach him any secrets that he could reveal, and even if they did, it was unlikely that he would. Why not allow him to observe? As he watched other shinobi practice their craft, Naruto did not understand what was happening, but he refused to criticize a good thing. Even though he was not recognized, he was a genjutsu prodigy and an artist with an eye for detail and a keen mind that could analyze nearly anything. He thus learned as he observed the shinobi engaged in combat. He observed how they moved during battle, how they aimed for the points that would deal the most damage, how they held themselves when throwing various weapons, how they held and moved their swords, how they used their bodies to give their attacks the most power, and what fundamental ideas made the various techniques work. In addition, he committed hand signals to memory while dissecting the jutsu to understand its operation. His intention was to be a master of both seals and genjutsu, but that did not mean he had to be powerless if he was unable to use either for any reason. But through his close observation, he was gradually developing a new skill that he was unaware of but would hone in the upcoming months and years. His skill as a watcher was limited to observing how people moved, held themselves, and, to a certain extent, how their chakra flowed, but it was there that he would eventually be able to assess a person's talent and determine the best training based on minutes of observation. But he would have to leave Konoha before that could happen. Despite his busy schedule, he did not neglect his genjutsu or seal work. However, it turned out that clan shinobi and even some clan shinobi had left scrolls about various theories and rules on all types of jutsu, including a few scrolls on the finer workings of fuinjutsu written by Minato Namikaze himself, in the library for public viewing. It was astounding how much knowledge the library held, even though very little of it was actual techniques. Naturally, Naruto was too smart to believe everything he read, and before applying any crazy theory to his work, he always made sure he wasn't working with it. His knowledge of seals had advanced to the point where even Jiraiya and Minato would be challenged to identify a rule that Naruto was unaware of. They were obviously light years ahead of Naruto in terms of practical application and seal creation, but he now knew enough to begin seal crafting soon. He had some ideas that he had developed while he was crippled, even though he knew enough to start with small, low power seals to prevent accidentally blowing himself up. Although his initial concept would be simple, it has the potential to transform the ninja world if it succeeds. 12 seals would be found on a weapon or in essentially arbitrary places on the body. They were unique because they would be equivalent to the 12 hand signs, each of which could be programmed to follow a specific sequence. Code, allowing a shinobi to use any jutsu while having both hands free to battle enemies without alerting them that he was going to blast them with something. Enabling the user to activate a jutsu by simply transferring the required quantity of chakra into the seal, which would take less than a second as opposed to perhaps 20, depending on the duration of the sequence and the caster's skill and speed. In order to prevent someone who is familiar with seals from reading the jutsu just by looking at the seal when it is not in use, there might even be some extra seals to conceal the sequence. Seal when it is not in use. Naruto had succeeded in finishing and seamlessly activating genjutsu on the field. It wasn't meant to be as powerful or draining as Zeku Sakai, nor was it as complex in the hallucinations it produced. Mekura was not intended to be ostentatious or to provide its victims with a fictitious world. Its sole objective was to ensure that the user would go unnoticed. All others just didn't notice him when he was in use. In order to avoid running into him, they would unconsciously avoid him by walking around him, but they would not even be aware of their actions. Better yet, there were no signs that the user was present, making him invisible. For instance, they would not only ignore him but also his footprints on a muddy road. It wasn't perfect, of course. People would notice the alarm and realize something was amiss if he set off a security system that sounded an alarm. They would assume there was a genjutsu and dispel it even though they wouldn't be able to see him. Additionally, even if they couldn't immediately find him, they would sense his presence if he slapped someone. He would therefore need to use a different ruse to get out of the crime scene, or it couldn't be used for assassination. He didn't dare bring it into clan compounds or the Hokage's tower, but it was still very useful when he was walking around the village without the Anbu following him. Right now, he was having trouble casting genjutsu with a catalyst other than sight, but he knew it would take time. To his annoyance, the nerves had apparently been damaged, and he could hardly move his arm from the elbow up, nor could he channel any chakra through it. However, by this point, his bones and muscle mass had healed, thanks to the old woman and her assistant who visited him frequently in the hospital. After a while, Naruto came to the realization that he preferred eating lunch outside in the wild over family dinners. Both Minato and Kushina had attempted to strike up a conversation with him, but they had found themselves at a loss for topics because they were unaware of his interests and pastimes. They knew he read a lot, and they had heard recently that he appeared to be around some Hyuga and Uchiha. They were unsure if he spoke to them, but they had a limited number of things they could discuss with him. Tsunami was acting like a worse brat than usual, which made things worse. As a result, Minato and Kushina had to pay more and more attention to her in order to keep her out of trouble rather than their son. In 2 or 3 months, things had gradually returned to normal, with Naruto's Mekura lending a hand a little, though he used it sparingly on his parents, because he seemed to not want it and preferred to spend more time outside than with them. Since the day Naruto finished it, Tsunami had been under it almost constantly. Though Naruto didn't like it, he felt that he was gradually becoming more tolerant of Minato and Kushina, who gave him more attention than before and made an effort to make amends at least 3 times a week. It seems that he still wanted to trust his parents, who did make an effort. Naruto had a positive attitude going into bed, and it appeared that his arms were improving because he was able to use them to grab a plastic cup and drink. Even though the entire process took nearly 30 seconds, Naruto took this as a positive sign. Since it indicated that he was on the road to recovery, any progress was better than none at all, and he had anticipated that it would be gradual. Admittedly, he hadn't anticipated it taking this long. In retrospect, this whole mess had not only been detrimental to Naruto because, had it not happened, he would not have been able to use seals to the extent that he does now because the library's knowledge would have been beyond his reach, but he would also never have considered several of the ideas he had developed to help those who had lost limbs, whether they be hands, arms, or just fingers. He had a concept, which meant that the majority of the work was done by his still, childlike logic, even though he hadn't been able to actually finish those ideas. He was unaware that it had taken Minato 4 years to figure out all the details and finish the Hiraishin after he had first conceived of the idea. Nevertheless, Naruto smiled contentedly as he went to sleep, dreaming of his future plans once he was at last normal. Naruto had a difficult time returning from dreamland. It took him more than a minute to realize he was awake, and he felt weak and sleepy. The pain that had accompanied each breath was what had warned him. He felt as though a hedgehog was going on a rampage inside his head. His limbs appeared to be filled with lead, and his lungs were on fire. Everything hurt, and his itchy eyes informed him that it was 4 in the morning when they checked the time. What was happening? The response was straightforward, but for a moment Naruto's mind just would not accept it. Tsunami, who had made it apparent in the previous weeks, during the few times he let her see him, that she detested Naruto, was lying on his bed, under his blanket, with one hand that had somehow gotten into his sleepwear jacket, resting directly above his aching heart. How in the world had she defeated Mekura? He was fully aware that just last night he had placed her, and, for once, his parents, under it. It should have taken them at least another day to realize Naruto was there, even though he had used the version that faded on its own. The boy with the blonde hair gathered all his energy. He hissed, "Tsunami, get out of my bed." Tsunami looked up, blinked, and a grimace formed on her face. She hissed back, "What are you doing here?" Naruto inhaled deeply to relax. "In case you haven't noticed, this is my room." After glancing around and realizing this, Tsunami blew Naruto a raspberry and quickly left the room, desperate to put some distance between them. As he sat in bed, Naruto wondered how long he would have to put up with these painful visits from Tsunami. He felt as though he had to throw up because of the sudden burning sensation in his throat. He got out of bed and stumbled over to the bathroom that was attached to his room. Before collapsing in a coughing fit, he managed to reach the sink. Naruto was convinced that his latest plague would have shook half of Konoha if it weren't for the sound. Blocking seals his father had put in place on every bathroom to protect privacy. Kyuubi. Yes, it's that thing once more. She doesn't seem to be accustomed to it yet. You wouldn't look this way if she hadn't done this during her early years. Looking like what? Observe your nose and arms. The fit ended after a few minutes, and his eyes were drawn to the mirror in his bandaged hand. His nose was still leaking blood, and his bandages were red with it. Naruto gazed down at his crimson hands. There, adhered to his fingers, was evidence of what he had always told his parents, that Tsunami was bad for him. It was only now that he realized how dangerous it was. Naruto told himself, this cannot continue. Either Tsunami is prohibited from entering my room, or I must go. It's getting worse, and I'm positive I'll die unless something is done right away. The Kyuubi remained silent. Naruto went to his parents after leaving his room. They had to take action in light of this evidence, or else he would permanently pack his bags and lose what little faith he still had in them. It turned out that his parents were still in Mekura, which allowed Naruto to do something he would never have been able to do otherwise. Listen in on his parents without them noticing. He had originally intended to just stop using the jutsu, but... We have to tell Naruto. It's just getting worse the longer we take, and I feel like breaking down every time I see him, Kushina said. Naruto stopped and gave his ears his full attention. This looked like a serious situation. Minato let out a sigh. You're right, but it's just not that easy. Every time I want to tell him, my throat tightens up. It's like my tongue just fails me, or the words themselves don't want to be spoken. Kushina chuckled glumly. How poetic we are when it comes to excusing how pathetic we are. Minato turned to face his spouse. He has a right to know, and Bawako is right when she says that waiting will only make it worse, but how? That's the great question. Honestly, I wish I could just order Bawako to do it. She has experience in those kind of things, and aren't usually doctors the ones who deliver such news? He was shrugged. Usually, but can you blame her for dropping that duty on us? Minato was the one laughing glumly now. As much as I'd like to, know this is hell. I've actually been practicing my confession to Naruto for weeks, but it just won't come out when I want it to. Kushina gave a nod. I know, I did too, but when I see the hope in his eyes, I just can't bring myself to crush that. Minato let out another sigh. It's much harder than initially expected. It's not like I can just walk up to Naruto and say, hello son, I forgot to tell you something. Remember when you broke and mushed your arm on your birthday? Well, that killed off most of your nerves and shattered your chakra paths, so you'll never be a shinobi, or even able to use your arm again. My bad. How do you tell your child that his lifetime dream can never become real because you forgot him on his own birthday? Naruto would have dropped whatever he was holding. Naruto's gaze expanded. He glanced at his arms, which hung lifelessly on his side, and shivered. All of a sudden, everything made sense. Even the most secret and dangerous jutsu, the way his parents behaved, the pitying glances, the strange tolerance the shinobi had displayed when he had observed them training. They were aware. Everyone had been aware. Nobody informed him that his arm would never heal, even though everyone knew it would. Naruto would lose his mind if he didn't leave. Damn the effects on his arms. The urge to smash things was already becoming too strong. As he fled the compound, Mekura made sure his father didn't pay attention to the slight sound of the gate opening and closing because it was only a notification and not an alarm. His parents gradually shifted to other subjects after deciding that the news would be given on their upcoming holiday, or day off, which was in 3 weeks. Naruto needed to be by himself at this moment, regardless of what his parents had to say. Minato scowled. He couldn't figure out why, but he had just had a really bad feeling, having learned from the birthday catastrophe to trust his instincts more than his head in such circumstances. He checked his seal's impulses, but nothing unusual was found. Therefore, it wasn't in the compound, whatever it was. Most likely in his office, printed on paper that looked innocent and deceptively white. Due to the fact that Kumo was not an allied village, he had to organize everything in preparation for the Chunin exams that were approaching there. It was unclear to him whether he would return home before tomorrow night. Kushina, I'm a bit worried. I won't be here until tomorrow evening at the earliest, and you? Kushina gave a nod. I have border patrol for the next few days, as I am still an active shinobi. I know. But Minato, I trust your seal work, and don't forget, we have both been gone for a few days before, and they were just fine. They'll call friends over, have lots of fun, and make a mess out of the house. And in an emergency, there are at least 3 Anbu in the nearby outpost at all times. Not to mention that our friends and fellow clan heads always send some poor soul to make sure the children don't blow up the house while without parental supervision. Her tone became more reserved, and I don't think either of our children will mind some time for themselves. Minato nodded, his mouth tinged with bitterness. As they witnessed Naruto attempting to use weapons that might never function again, their predicament with him grew worse every day. He was pitiful. Everything he took pride in, including his silver tongue, wits, charisma, and confidence, simply vanished in front of his own son, despite his handling of the Kyuubi and Shinigami. He couldn't remember ever feeling so powerless as he did when he stood in front of his son and attempted to convey to him the full scope of what had transpired. All he could hope was that Naruto would only hear about his crippling from his parents. As they say, watch what you wish for because you might get it. Minato's wish had been fulfilled by the gods, but not in the manner he had desired. Naruto was rushing off. He just needed to get away, with no particular objective in mind. For an additional hour, he was safe from their gaze because the Anbu monitoring this sector had, somewhat unintentionally, been caught in one of his temporary Mekura 2 days prior. Additionally, because it was not even 5 in the morning, the streets were essentially empty. Naruto went into the darker alleys, where he was by himself, leaving the main streets, where some early risers, such as bakers, were already out and about. Naruto was unaware that he was approaching a part of Konoha that had not been visited since the Kyuubi attack. In this sector, the Kyuubi's Yuki had accumulated and apparently developed a mind of its own. It drained any living thing that came into contact with it, even turning the victim's flesh and bones into energy, leaving only agonized cries that suddenly stopped. It wasn't that they didn't want to. It was obvious that the Yuki's territory was fenced, but as luck would have it, the section of the fence that Naruto was approaching from had been destroyed. Since no one had ever gone near that area, no one had discovered it and fixed it. Still upset about what he had discovered, Naruto walked through the remains of the fence and into what had been called the dead zone, blissfully unaware of the trouble he was in. Even though he no longer trusted his parents, this most recent betrayal had been extremely painful. Why even am I surprised? Before he spoke, he asked himself. I'm a damn cripple and nobody tells me. Now it all makes sense. Why should I waste my time training Naruto swordsmanship? He won't be able to wield one anyways. Why teach Naruto jutsu? It's not like he'll be able to use them. Why bother training him in anything? It's not like he'll ever be a shinobi. Let him watch. It's not like he'll ever be able to perform anything he sees. 20 feet away, he kicked an empty can, sending it flying through a window. The glass broke, as if it had been filled with sand. Naruto was unconcerned. His body trembled with hysterical sobs as he broke down. Everything was falling on him. There was nothing he could do as his world fell apart. He had discovered that Bawako, who was regarded as the best doctor in the village with Tsunade gone, was unable to fix his arms, which were permanently gone and reduced to chakra. Less flesh. It seemed that she had been the one to declare that there was no hope after Tsunade's departure. With resentful tears streaming down his face, Naruto muttered, "It's not fair. Why it's always him? What horrible thing had he done to merit this? For once, why couldn't the gods torture someone else? Why me? Why does everything bad have to happen to me?" Self-pity and brooding were not Naruto's style, but at this moment, it was simply too much. Naruto was so engrossed in his suffering that he failed to notice the red mist that had developed behind him. It was leaking out of all crevices and solidifying into a wave of red. The Yuki had no true instincts and was not genuinely intelligent. However, because it had spent so much time hunting for anything that stupidly came its way, it had learned not to just latch itself onto the prey while it was spread out too thin, or else the food might slip free and escape. Additionally, the Yuki had developed a straightforward strategy because many creatures had an instinct that alerted them to rapidly approaching objects. It would first collect, then move cautiously closer and adhere itself to the body without doing anything. The majority of the Yuki would leap forward once the prey was secured, engulfing the poor victim and draining it of all chakra before starting to transform the remainder into something that would further support the Yuki as a whole. Tiny strands of Yuki had prepared the rush by attaching themselves to the newest prey, which was much larger than Yuki typically captured. It would be too late by the time the creature realized, right now. As it moved from the bottom of the backside to the head, the red wave branded against the body. The prey's eyes were closed, so it had yet to notice anything, but it didn't appear to feel anything either. If the Yuki were capable of feeling such a complex emotion as confusion, this would be it. But it spread, engulfing the whole body. As if burned, it suddenly let go of the creature. The Yuki discovered that this organism was not only flooded with itself, but also resistant to Yuki. After sensing that it was inside the organism, the Yuki let it go because it thought it was friendly. Human. Did you experience that? What? Naruto cried a little. This area, this entire place, is overflowing with my energy. I sensed it. It appeared to have expanded, devouring anything in its path. It's this. If I ration it, I should be able to live off of it for months or even years. Despite feeling a burning sensation, which he had previously attributed to his grief, Naruto had not even realized how close he had just come to death. The mass had broken up by the time he opened his eyes. It's gone. Fuck it. Look for it. I can do something you'll enjoy if I'm correct. Naruto took a whiff. All right, this was enough for Naruto. It had felt good to cry all he had, but enough was enough. He wasn't a brooder or an emo. It was time for him to stand again. He had been hit by an unexpected blow. For as long as he could remember, his arms were screwed. Okay, he'd made it this far without them. He'd make it even farther. His 12 seal set was nearly finished. It just required additional testing and refinement. Even though he had no intention of learning one-handed seals, he would be able to erase his jutsu difficulties with them. There was always a way to learn taijutsu, he just needed to find it. Nevertheless, this most recent betrayal had deeply affected him. It was all the more painful because he hadn't realized that he had been beginning to let his parents back into his heart. Naruto became aware that he was truly upset with his parents for the first time since his birthday. He had been annoyed and irritated, but never really furious. Once more, he had let his parents harm him. Naruto whispered to himself, "Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Rest assured, it won't happen again." He believed that his blood relatives would now only be landlords and unwanted roommates, and he would leave if it turned out that he was unable to heal his arm here or if it did. Time was not an issue for him. For starters, he hadn't even made it into the academy, and according to his FA, there was no rush to leave because, according to Minato Namikaze, he would not be entering it. He would be considered a civilian, and civilians were free to depart whenever they so desired. Because he had never served Konoha, they were unable to make him a missing nin. The clan laws were the only possible issue. As long as they weren't otherwise obligated, such as by shinobi duties, every clan member was free to depart and go somewhere else without having to leave the clan. The Hyuga used the Kagenotori no Juin caged bird seal so liberally because of this. Any Hyuga who was deemed a servant would pack his bag and leave if they didn't. A Hyuga who left the clan was still a Hyuga, and a Namikaze who left the clan was still a Namikaze, since only the clan head had the authority to formally expel one from the clan. The clan still had the authority to call them into service even if they explicitly stated that they had no plans to rejoin. This meant that the free clan member would have to return and serve the clan and the village with which they were affiliated for a predetermined amount of time or until a predetermined number of missions had been finished. On the plus side, the head was forced to release the individual from the clan if they requested to do so. There was nothing more they could ask of the man. He had fulfilled his obligation. Better yet, since they were effectively hired on a mercenary basis, such individuals could leave the village without facing any consequences as long as they hadn't committed a crime. The clan's only catch was that they had to personally deliver the order to return. Although a clan member was not required to carry out the task, the directive had to be given in writing, and the person delivering it had to deliver it straight to the intended recipient. However, the recipient was unable to flee, block the courier, or disregard the order once the courier had located him and he understood what it was about. The man or woman would have to serve their time if they were able to locate and identify him and had the letter. Even though it sounded nice to cut off all contact with his family, Naruto had no intention of wasting 4 years of his life because he didn't think they would assign him B, A, or S ranked missions to expedite the process and serve Konoha. Naruto would therefore disappear from the face of the planet after leaving Konoha. He had already acquired some materials, including jutsu that would alter his appearance and could not be dispelled. And he got the idea from his stupid sister, of all people. She had messed up a henge so that she could truly change into what she desired, but the outcome had not been favorable for her. Naruto had examined what she had done, how she had done it, and what one should do to minimize the harm to the body. She had spat blood for 5 minutes, and anyone without the Kyuubi's chakra would have probably been screwed up for good. Although it was far from ideal, he could now alter his skin slightly and permanently change the color of his eyes and hair. He could use seals to make them as permanent as he desired without losing focus. But he had to find something to do with the rest of his anger. He glanced around and kicked the wall quite forcefully. He jumped back and called, "What the hell?" The wall was half down. Naruto noticed something for the first time as he looked around. Where the hell am I? He had never been in this location before. The location was clearly deserted. There was no sign of life anywhere, and the buildings appeared damaged. Some had fallen, and some appeared to have been crushed by something. Although it appeared as though he had left Konoha, Naruto was aware that he had not. You must have spent the most time here during the Kyuubi attack. He noticed the monument when he looked around. Now he could at least get his bearings. It was still a dangerous place. He peered through the recently created opening in the wall, and gave a blink. What looked like a secret door had been smashed through by the falling pieces. Naruto's curiosity overcame his knowledge that he should be departing. He cautiously made his way inside, ready to leap to the side if there was any rumbling, but there was none. He saw that the ceiling and walls were held up by steel beams, so it was unlikely that the entire structure would just fall apart. So he walked slowly over to the hole in the earth. He had been correct in his suspicion. It led to a flight of stairs. Naruto could move forward, but he had to climb a little to avoid the debris. Naruto whispered, "Who would build something like this? What is it? A deserted Anbu base? Maybe this was once a route station, before the Sandaime closed that branch? Rats, I can't even see my own hands, if I only had some light." Then he jumped up in shock and almost had a heart attack. The path to the bottom of the stairs was illuminated by torches, casting a ghostly blue glow about 20 feet below. Nervously, Naruto glanced around. There was no response to, "Hello? Is anybody there?" "You are. It's so bright, turn off the torches." "Nothing at all. It's obviously not voice activated. What else could it be?" He glanced around and saw that the step he had just placed his foot on was above 2 seals. Evidently, they served as a detection barrier, igniting the torches when they were interrupted and transmitting a thread of chakra between them. Excellent. Shit. What if this place is booby trapped? Hello. I'm lost. Nothing. Naruto made the decision to move forward, but very carefully. A section of the hallway behind the stairs required him to paint a specific array on a piece of paper before the ceiling collapsed and crushed him, and he did discover no fewer than 7 traps, for more seal threads over fake stairs. There were no other routes, so he was finally standing in a chamber, ostensibly the only one. The walls were lined with torches once more, their flickering light adding to the eerie atmosphere. Any treasure hunter would have been disappointed by the room itself. In front of him, a stone basin was lowered into the floor. It was too small for Naruto, but it would be sufficient to wash his face or bathe a baby. A desk, a drawer filled with folders, and several broken clipboards that appeared to have been thrown on the floor next to several strange machines that Naruto couldn't understand were all located on the far wall. He noticed a row of 6 long cages with beds of various sizes on his left. The first 2 had adult-sized beds, while the next 3 got smaller until they reached the last cage, which had at least 10 cribs. Strangely, they were all strapped together with leather, as though to keep them in bed. Maybe this had been a mad ninja station. However, Naruto's attention was drawn to the wall on the right. Jars filled it, each holding a substance that appeared greenish in this light. Every jar had a label, was the same size, and was constructed of glass. Additionally, it was the wall nearest the basin. Naruto came over and checked for any traps. He reached for the nearest jar and held it to his face, attempting to read the writing, but he saw none. Who wrote this? A chimpanzee? Even Tsunami doesn't write this bad. Let's see, Ku. Ra. M.A. I have no idea what that's supposed to be. K+? What's that supposed to ouch? Years of exposure had made the glass brittle, and when Naruto gripped it more tightly, it broke. The liquid splashed everywhere, and a few splinters pierced his flesh. He searched around for something to rinse his mouth with but couldn't find anything. You are. Yuck. I think I swallowed some. Ew. Tastes worse than the medicine for my arm. I didn't think it was possible. He glanced at his palm after dropping the shattered glass. There was only one glass fragment that had pierced his flesh, so it wasn't too bad. Naruto was able to carefully grab it with his teeth and pull it out. It appeared to be fine except for a slight bleeding. Later, he would have it disinfected. Human. It's here. This place is very focused. Stay put. It could attack you. For now, let it go. It will be handled by me. He noticed that one of the jars was on the desk rather than in the cabinet like the others. Naruto moved closer this time, being more cautious and avoiding contact. It was a different label when he read it. To read the kanji, he scowled. His gaze strayed to the bottle of accelerated regeneration, then to the basin, and back again. Accelerated. Whoever wrote this needs lessons, badly. Wait, is that supposed to mean recreation? Accelerated recreation? Then maybe the other thing wasn't Kurama, but cure, and the name of some disease. Is this stuff? Then, with the dexterity of a small bird, he picked up the jar and carried it to the basin. After removing the lid, he filled the basin with it. He glanced around before picking up a piece of glass and cutting the back of his useless left hand very shallowly. Medicine works best when directly applied where it's supposed to work, so he said. Then he raised it and allowed it to soak in the liquid, ready to remove it at any time if something went wrong. It wasn't like his arm could get much worse, after all. Nevertheless, he stopped the arm's circulation before allowing it to dip because it was better safe than sorry. Since the traps were deactivated, he would make it outside before he collapsed if the situation was truly bad. Then he would probably be discovered before a terrible event occurred. He might even make it to the hospital himself, who knew? Continue doing whatever you are doing. It appears to be intriguing. He reprimanded himself, saying, "Great Naruto, very optimistic." He hissed after that. The pain wasn't excruciating. Rather, it felt like alcohol disinfection. One could grind his teeth and endure the sting and burn. Nevertheless, Naruto saw something just as he was ready to withdraw his hand. Wait, am I hallucinating? He squinted and looked more closely, blinking away a tear of agony. Yes, the cut was shrinking. It was a slow process, so slow that it took concentration to notice, but it appeared to be effective. Naruto actually had to smile in spite of the stinging pain that was creeping up his arm. Naruto had never felt more sensation in that arm since he woke up in the hospital, despite the pain. His nerves were healing, albeit only slightly, and that was the only explanation for such feelings. He took another look at the jars. If this was all medicine. And now a piece of Naruto that his life had all but destroyed came back to life. He was no longer the cool-headed prodigy in this moment. He was giddy from the small and extremely painful success on his arm, which made him look like a kid with free pick in a toy store. With a broad smile on his face, Naruto mumbled, "A lot helps a lot." He was grabbing more and more jars and pouring a little of everything into the basin without even looking at the descriptions, which were in any case unreadable. He most likely wouldn't have to worry about getting sick ever again after this. All of the medications had a combination of Kurama clan DNA, such as version 1, V2, V3, version 3+, and final version, which he would have noticed if he had bothered to read the labels. In fact, what he had discovered was one of Orochimaru's first laboratories, which he had abandoned long before he actually left Konoha. This was due to the fact that the experiment had failed and that the laboratory was too small and ill-equipped for his needs. Orochimaru had harvested genetic material from the Kurama clan at the time, leaving the DNA of the other clan in his other lab, from anyone he could find who had anything unique. He then used it to make a mixture that, according to the plan, could give the abilities to others who didn't have them in the first place. All attempts to inject the solution into someone else had failed, but he had been able to create it. Death resulted from the body rejecting the changes, even though the solution worked as intended. Eventually, Orochimaru had to construct incubators and allow embryos to absorb the liquid after using progressively younger hosts, but even they were unable to resist the changes. Orochimaru had surrendered it when the last one passed away. It was useless because this was not how Kekkei Genkei was obtained. He had originally planned to demolish the location, but he was deployed to fight in the war before he could do so, so he simply cleared away all evidence of who had been working here and departed. He didn't care about the corpses, the antiquated equipment, or the remaining solutions. He didn't care if the lab was discovered. There was no sign of Orochimaru, and everything that was left in it was useless anyhow. He'd just have to stay under the radar for a while if it were discovered. To demonstrate how little he cared for it, he had even left the majority of the traps deactivated. Eventually, Orochimaru had become so focused on a new technique for obtaining Kekkei Genkei, directly injecting the DNA into the embryo, that he had forgotten the lab even existed. The lab had been permanently written off by Orochimaru following the Kyuubi attack. By the time anyone entered it, the Yuki residue would have eroded away all evidence, if it still existed. Due to special circumstances, Naruto's body was now filled with Kyuubi Yuki, which was flowing fairly docilely through his system because of his sister's attack earlier. This was because the goal of the Yuki was to toughen him, or, if you think about who it was supposed to be in, her, rather than destroy the carrier. On Naruto's arms, the only part of his body where his natural chakra flow was unhindered, this Yuki had started to collect. The Yuki was therefore more than ready to handle the newcomer when Naruto decided to cut there of all places, incorporating it into Naruto's system after concluding that it was advantageous. But because this was not the original Jinchuriki's body, Naruto's Yuki and its capacity to absorb or eliminate foreign substances were both limited. Naruto was blissfully unaware of how deep the shit he was about to jump into, so it was truly a miracle that the process of gaining the increased recreation had not killed him. Naruto turned his gaze to the basin. Almost all of it was filled with bluish, green liquid. It had been difficult to get all the jars because he had to move the chair and desk to get to the ones at the top while being cautious not to drop any. However, he had ultimately been successful. He had poured some of the liquid from each jar into the basin and mixed it well with one of the strange metal tools. Even though his arm was still hurting, he could now move his index finger a little without the other three moving in unison. He would be better than ever soon. Careful not to cut any veins or arteries, he snatched up another piece of glass and cut his hands deeper, this time cutting a little up the arms. If you bled out before your immunity to diseases and super healing could take effect, what good were they? Naruto took one final look at the turquoise liquid. He let his hand slide under the surface and called, "With this, I'll be better than ever." He grinned to himself. "I'll make the stupid arms move, and if it's the last thing I do." He had no idea that the likelihood that it would actually be the last thing he did was so near to 100% that not even Tsunade would have placed a wager on it. It began with the burning he had experienced earlier, and for about 10 seconds that was all there was to it, a tolerable but increasing pain. Then, GUARG, gurgle arc. His arm exploded in a wave of pain that was worse than when his arms broke and spread throughout his entire body from one moment to the next. Naruto lacked the strength to even scream. His pupils had contracted to the point where they were invisible, and he was twitching uncontrollably. Foam was bubbling out of his mouth and dampening the gurgles. His skin was as gray as ash, and blood poured from his ears and nose. Just before benevolent darkness engulfed him, Naruto swore at his own foolishness. The Yuki handled one solution with ease. No issue, but two had been a minor effort. All defenses, however, are overwhelmed by this vortex of liquids that were never meant to be combined in the first place. Slowly, the solution was leaking up the arm, killing and literally destroying every cell it came into contact with. Seizures of protest at the invading source of painful death racked the host's entire body. It would have been simple to fight off the liquid in a Jinchuriki, but in this case, the reinforcement of Yuki was severed, so the only thing left to fight was what was inside the body. Furthermore, there was insufficient to avert disaster. Because it had been released by a Jinchuriki rather than the Biju directly, this Yuki was also a little diluted. Simply put, it was not intended to exist apart from a living thing. One important thing to realize about Biju is that they are made entirely of Yuki. There are no internal organs, no bones, and no flesh. There is no actual brain or nerves, but there is a center of will that is typically found in the head, where the mind once was. Every flicker of Yuki was filled with a specific set of instincts that told the central mind that any energy source that gets in contact is to be drained and all energy is to be absorbed and converted to Yuki unless ordered otherwise. Yuki with identical signature is not to be absorbed, but assisted and aided, and the continued existence of the collective has highest priority. This kept the Biju solid even though the central mind was focused on a single spot. In a sense, a Biju was merely a demonic energy ant hive. The queen, if you will, was the central mind, and the rest of the Yuki were the workers and soldiers who ate to make more Yuki. The simple Yuki did not hesitate to split off from the main body to fight an attacking force, even if it meant losing its own existence. But the last order changed for Yuki, who for some reason was left behind. Its primary objective gradually shifted to self-preservation until reunification with the main body is possible, due to the lack of a central will. In order to ensure that the mind was strengthened, the information and intelligence were shared with the collective. These leftover Yuki were crucial to the Biju because they acquired intelligence and might have been smarter and more knowledgeable than the main body at the time of reunification. It was a two-edged sword because, when sealed inside a living host, a Biju typically took information from the host's brain to make itself stronger. Up to a certain point, the information included personality in addition to knowledge and intelligence. If the tainted thoughts were considered harmful, the Biju could, if it were intelligent enough, rid itself of them. However, this process had to be completed rapidly, and the knowledge absorbed from the host shouldn't be the focal point of the personality. As in the case of the Ichibi, a growing number of sealings combined with an increasing number of personality traits extracted from the hosts would destabilize the personality and cause madness. Due to its lack of access to milk for knowledge, Kyuubi had become dependent on these residues, which was beneficial to its mental health. To comprehend what transpired next, one must recognize how near Yuki of identical signature were to one another. Knowing that it required this host, Naruto did something out of the ordinary for Yuki. Residue because the Yuki in his body was becoming overloaded. It sent its own wave as a distress signal to the large mass of itself just outside with Kyuubi's consent. The entire Konoha Yuki population, dispersed over an area of over a square mile, appeared to be looking up. As one poured down the once hidden passageway and slammed into the chamber with the force of a typhoon, a chill ran through the red mist and it rose from all directions to swarm towards one building like a giant swarm of red locusts rose up. With the exception of Naruto, who was lifted into the air almost delicately after the Yuki successfully identified the source of the SOS signal and the liquid that had caused the mess, which was blown out of the collapsing basin and into the air, everything that happened in that room was crushed by the Yuki's steadily increasing pressure. The Yuki then performed a crude analysis of the problem's underlying cause. The outside Yuki discovered something it had been searching for ever since it had been separated as the mass engaged with Naruto's inner Yuki. The Kyuubi is the master. The Yuki had actually discovered something in Naruto that was not only uncommon but had never been seen before. Naruto was a freak of nature, or, to put it rudely, an anomaly. A typical human was not like a Jinchuriki. For starters, a pregnancy was risky for the mother's life and took longer. Another, less well-known fact was that, regardless of age, a new bodily function initiated a new reaction as soon as a Jinchuriki was created. They had called it Osurge. The concept was straightforward. The Biju sent waves of Yuki through the host's body once the seal had set and everything had calmed down. This was actually done to acclimate the body to the Yuki that would eventually be flowing through it, not even with malicious intent. The Jinchuriki experienced excruciating pain the first time this occurred, but eventually the body adapted to the surges and stopped noticing them. In the event that the Yuki had to be released, this was required to keep the body from being ripped apart. When a Jinchuriki released more chakra than their body could manage, the skin would typically tear off first, then proceed to damage internal organs and muscles until the bones were crushed. If the flow was not stopped by then, the brain could potentially liquefy. Naruto and Tsunami's situation was genuinely exceptional. There was a twin in addition to the Jinchuriki being created at an exceptionally early age, right after birth. Not quite the same twin, but sufficiently similar. Subconsciously, Tsunami had been rerouting the Yuki from her into her twin's system by making direct contact with him, rather than gritting her teeth and enduring the surges until she was unable to feel them anymore. Tsunami was unaware of what was happening, but she was firmly rooted in the subconscious knowledge that, when it hurts, get to Naruto and all gets better. Even though Naruto's body was different from the one the Yuki was meant to be in, it would function similarly to its original host and turn him into a pseudo Jinchuriki with the assistance of its master and his genetic composition. Naturally, Naruto wasn't a Jinchuriki, his seal wasn't designed that way. It only contained the soul. As a result, he lacked the enhanced regeneration that the Yuki should have given him if it had a master and a seal that could process the situation quickly. It took days or even weeks for the body to recover from the harm the Yuki caused while it was being acclimated to it. But because Naruto was still a baby and not an adult, his ability to adapt was at its highest, and his body gradually developed a resistance to the Yuki. Since the surges occurred approximately every 2 months, Naruto had ample time to recover before the next wave arrived, so at first there was no real issue with that. The Kyuubi's chakra, however, was growing impatient and began releasing more Yuki at shorter intervals as the years went by without Tsunami becoming any more resilient to the Yuki than when it was born. With the Yuki still attacking his organs and its master still asleep until it grew stronger, Naruto's body finally couldn't handle the growing amount and began to slowly break down. This eventually caused damage to the lungs, which is why he coughed up blood. Nevertheless, Naruto's body was highly resistant to Yuki, and since there was no seal to keep it from the master, it could reintegrate with him and serve its function. It seemed as though the Yuki had discovered paradise. A host where it could easily obtain food, rest, and be free to follow its master's wishes rather than the host's. It did whatever the master requested, even if it meant assisting the host. The Yuki made the decision to cease its scavenging life and go back to its master at that precise moment. Because of its master, it felt compelled to stop its host from being destroyed. The hands weren't bothered by the internal chakra that lined the majority of the body. The future host's life was in danger because this arm was also overflowing with solutions of questionable origin. But now that the solutions were easily destroyed at will, the Kyuubi became interested. The human's memories of meeting a member of the Kurama clan demonstrate how it could be used to its advantage. They were helpful in using genjutsu, which the human loved more than life itself. Therefore, the Kyuubi restructured the human's DNA, giving it an enhancement, rather than merely erasing the solutions, both inside and outside the body, that were absorbed. This allowed them to integrate the aspects of their DNA that made them capable of such feats. The host's abilities could produce illusions that would compete with, if not outperform, that clan. Feeling satisfied that everything was proceeding as planned, the Kyuubi ordered it to heal the boy's arms with a fresh flood of Yuki. It considered that from now on the human would essentially worship him. Naruto let out a moan. He felt lightheaded and his throat was bone-dry. He got to his feet slowly and looked around. Where had he gone? Then he recalled. Oh yeah, I found this room with the medicine. His whole body hurt. He pounded his knuckles on his forehead and cursed himself, even though he felt the words in his throat turn to sandpaper. Idiot! What stupid idiot would just mix unknown medicines together like that? You're behaving like Tsunami. What possessed you to do something so? He stopped breathing. He looked down at his knuckles. No way, he said in a whisper. He had been using both hands to beat himself. Look at this, Kyuubi, human. You had better be thankful because you would have died if I hadn't sent my chakra into you. How did you do it? You couldn't have endured any more. He sounded proud of himself at the end. I used the one outside. It took some time to get it to listen correctly of what I wanted, but it worked wonders, just like I expected my chakra to do so. It returned to its sleep and rearranged the priorities of its long-lost chakra without saying anything. Thanks, Kyuubi. Even though it felt a little weird to do so after all this time, he flexed his arms a few times and shed happy tears when they obeyed. However, he instantly alerted himself. He had allowed his emotions to rule him twice, both of which had caused him a great deal of suffering. It was time to stop behaving like a child and to think like he had in recent weeks. That is, with intellect, nothing more. His arms recovered. That was excellent. But not only would that raise a lot of questions, but it would also mean that everyone who had allowed him to observe their training would no longer do so if he went out and shouted that to the world. He didn't intend to stay long, but if he concealed his arms, search parties would be searching for a boy with crippled arms rather than one with two functional arms. They would overlook him if he sat in a restaurant with a slightly different appearance, using his left arm to eat and his right to drink. No one needed to know that his arms operated. That information was provided on a need.to. No basis. It also had a slightly different appearance. The nails were sharpened to short claws, like a fox's, and the skin was a little paler than before. He then took a look around. He appeared to be free of dust and shards, but everything else was ruined. He was starving. Fortunately, he had retrieved his wallet prior to leaving the house. After exiting the tunnel in the chamber, he looked for his original route. Let's see, the monument is there. From the position of the faces, the market should be that way. 20 minutes after his departure, a group of Anbu members showed up, anxiously scanning the area. One with a hawk mask whispered, that Yuki has been here for years, it can't just evaporate from 1 minute to the next. Another, donning a beaver mask, gazed at the owl. Faced third member, do you sense anything? Owl. Mask gave a headshake. There's no Yuki left, but the traces that it was here are too strong to get any other signal. There is no source of chakra or Yuki nearby, but the Yuki has been here so long that everything seems to emit residue. Even if an army of cages had stood right here 10 seconds ago, I wouldn't be able to tell. I can hardly sense you over all the interference, and you're constantly emitting chakra. The hawk. Mask gave a headshake. This is pointless. We're not going to find anything out right now. Let's return for now and leave the rest to search parties. Beaver. Mask let out a sigh. Do you think the barrier will give any clues? In response, Taka said, not likely. The Yuki. Interference has always been a bother. If one gets into a 1-mile radius of it, and the market is closer than that, all the guys from the barrier see is a big blur. Let's call it quits. After nodding, the others vanished a moment later. Luckily, the day was windy, or else they would have seen footprints heading toward the market from a wall that had collapsed. Kushina was preparing a late breakfast in the kitchen. Just 10 minutes after returning from her border patrol at 9 in the morning, she discovered Konoha in a chaotic state. 3 days after her departure, the Yuki that had been lingering and attacking anything since the Kyuubi attack abruptly vanished, and no one was able to determine why. Everyone initially thought Tsunami had done something, but this was not the case. Since that day, poor Minato had not been home for a single moment because the council was holding one meeting after another, which would probably continue all week. However, at last, a few brave individuals ventured into the dead zone and returned with the news that the Yuki was indeed gone. There should be time for breakfast even though she herself would most likely be called away again soon. The sound of the door opening caused her to look up. Naruto let out a sigh. He had to be courteous to avoid getting even more irritated after seeing Kushina's shoes. On the market, he had discovered that he had been absent for 3 days. "I'm back," he called out. Even though Naruto no longer had any faith in his parents, he felt as though he had been punched in the stomach when Kushina's voice came from the kitchen. "You were out? Anyways, breakfast will be ready in a minute. Could you wake Tsunami?" Gaping in shock, Naruto stood there. They hadn't even noticed that he had been gone for 3 days? Mekura had long since worn off. This was the final nail in the coffin. Anger twisted his face. In one form or another, he would be leaving here today. He wouldn't impose his presence on people who clearly didn't need it because they clearly didn't care about him. He called back, "I'm not hungry." He then made his way to his room, stopping briefly to let Tsunami know that there was food waiting downstairs, and then he calmed down. There was no reason to be upset. Experiencing anger was ineffective and wasted on unimportant people. He didn't have time for unreasonable rage. He needed to pack. Naruto had no way of knowing that both of his parents had been absent for the past 3 days, that Kushina had only been here for 30 minutes and had assumed he was still in bed, that the only people in the house had been Tsunami and other children, and that any adults nearby had focused entirely on them because some of them were unaware that the Hokage had a son. Naruto was therefore resolved to leave Konoha before dawn, barring the possibility that he would need to adjust his genjutsu now that his arms were functional. He was already aware of his first destination.
That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this great story. See you in the next one.